and Corporate Services. We will get right into it. Could I get a mover for the consent items? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Any questions on consent? Questions on consent? Councillor Ioannidis? Oh, no? Okay. Okay, no questions. Those in... Oh, here we go. Councillor Gazzola.
I just wanted to know if there are 3 grants that the Environment Committee is giving. Do we ever get a report on... They talk about here what they're going to do. Do we ever get a report on what actually happens?
Speak to that. Mr. Wilbur?
I don't know, but we can follow up and let you know.
Very good. Councillor Yaneski?
Yes, on the first one, there's 5 appointments, 2 in Waterloo, 2 Kitchener, 1 Township. I'm just wondering why we are adopting the appointments of those that are not within the City of Kitchener. I thought that would be the responsibility of the other municipalities.
Hi, good morning. Through the chair. The Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee is a joint planning committee, so all the council for all the participating municipalities approve the appointments at the same time during the same month.
Of everybody out whole. So in Waterloo, they'll be appointing the Kitchener ones as well.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no further questions. Those in favor of consent items? And none are opposed. Okay, we'll move on to the proposed 2015 business plan. Ms. Major. Mr. Wilmer?
Okay, should we wait or?
Since there's no delegations in this, perhaps we could go ahead to the next item on the Upper Dune Conservation District and then come back to this one.
Okay. Sorry? I think we're waiting for presentation. Is that correct? Waiting for presentation for the proposed business plan? Okay. My only concern is Councillor Fernandez did indicate that she'd be running a little bit late this morning. So, and this item is of particular interest. The Dune Heritage item is of particular interest to her. So, do we have an idea how long it will take to get the presentation done? About 2 minutes? Okay, we'll just hold on and do the business plan, okay? So, basically, take a 2-minute break. Paste it. Doing mail stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, I think it looks like we're ready to go. Ask you to take your seats. Okay, I'd like to reconvene. Can we... Ms. Major, when you're ready.
Okay, good morning, Chair Davey and members of the Finance and Corporate Services Committee. I'd like to present the proposed City of Kitchener 2015 business plan for discussion this morning. This plan has been developed under the leadership and direction of the corporate leadership team with the full participation of the corporate management team and input from Council. The purpose of the business plan is to establish operational priorities for the current year that are driven by the objectives of the strategic plan, responsive to the expectations of the community, and achievable and financially sustainable into the future. The business plan and budget are developed in parallel through an iterative process of review and revision. Together, the business plan and budget provide a comprehensive view of the resources that will be collected, how they will be distributed, and the way in which those resources will be used to serve the community in 2015. This plan outlines a clear path for the organization, one that strikes a balance between the need for consistent service delivery to the community on a day-to-day basis and the focus on emerging issues and opportunities that will help position the city well for the future. This is a one-year plan with an additional one-year outlook to capture projects that will extend into 2016. The plan includes an overview of each department, a description of the core services delivered by those departments, and there are 47 core services in total, and a listing of project commitments by division, identifying the link back to the strategic area of focus. In 2015, there are 29 corporate projects and 75 divisional projects included in this business plan. Approximately 94% of the capacity of the organization is dedicated to the ongoing operation and provision of core services, with the remaining 6% allocated to continuous improvement projects, corporate and strategic initiatives, and other council directives. The percentage capacity dedicated to core service varies from service to service, and I've selected a few examples to give you a better understanding of what this number means on a service-by-service basis. For example, custodial services, which is the one that's in front there, is made up primarily of frontline staff, with a focus on service delivery. The capacity for projects and other initiatives primarily rests with management. And you'll notice that there are no projects in this business plan being led by custodial services. In contrast, economic development has a complement of professional staff as well that split their time between delivering core service and projects. And in 2015, 9 business plan projects are going to be led by economic development, 2 of which are corporate projects. Financial planning, which of course is a fairly small division with fewer staff, have 75% of their capacity dedicated to core service. They are in the business plan only leading 2 business plan projects, but one of their core functions is to support divisions throughout the organization in managing and moving forward on their projects. And financial planning is involved in at least 20 other projects throughout the organization. In 2015, we are introducing a number of different performance measures to capture the results that are achieved through core services. They should help identify opportunities to serve the community better over time. For each core service, there are 3 to 5 key results included, and we will be phasing this in for all core services over the next 2 years. In 2015, we are going to start capturing data for 12 core services in the business plan, including 47 different metrics. And the first set of data for 2015 will be reported in early 2016. The corporate leadership team has reviewed all project proposals and council's priorities to identify those that will be managed as corporate projects. These projects are monitored monthly, reviewed by the corporate management team, and discussed by the corporate leadership team if actions needed to keep them moving forward. Corporate projects have been prioritized from 1 to 4, with 1 being the top priority. I'm not going to make note of every individual project here, as you can see them on the slide, but I hope you will see that those top 12 priorities that were directed by Council have been included as corporate projects, along with a number of other initiatives the Council was looking for action on in 2015. So there are 6 priority 1 corporate projects, and I'll just note the development of alternative traffic calming options is included in this one. Priority 2, priority 3, and priority 4. So the priorities do help staff to understand the urgency and importance around each of these projects, and the council priorities that were decided in December have been prioritized based on the number of points that were allocated to each of these projects relative to each other. So all of the projects in the business plan have been linked back to one of the community priorities as identified through the strategic planning process, or they directly contribute to organizational effectiveness and efficiency. And I think this graph demonstrates that there is a very good balance in the work that will be undertaken throughout the organization in 2015 in moving forward in a number of areas. This chart really only represents the number of projects and is not an accurate reflection of the amount of effort that will go into each of the projects or the amount of change that's expected to result from them, but it is a good starting point in managing the focus of the organization and making sure that we're covering all the bases. So that's sort of the conclusion of my presentation. I think in terms of next steps is to answer any questions for clarification for you today. As your discussions unfold around the 2015 budget, we will look to synchronize the work in the business plan with the budget decisions, and we've tried to point out those projects that will be impacted by those decisions. The recommendation for today is that Council will approve the business plan with the budget on final budget day, which is scheduled for February 23rd. And you can look forward to the project status of the projects included in this business plan to be reported to the public and to you, Council, every 4 months going forward. So with that, I'd like to ask you if there are any questions regarding the business plan.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see this all comprehensively. Questions I have, Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, through you, Chair Davey. Thanks, Laurie, for your presentation. The one question I have a couple questions actually, but the one question I have is how long have we been tracking our business plan, like in this format?
How long?
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think with I think approximately 3 years, we have been focused on the monitoring the results.
Okay, so that's what I thought, because I thought it was during our time last term. The other question that I have is there any way that we can qualitate the deficiencies and all that in a dollar figure on having a business plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that I can give a short answer to that question, but I would like to say that efficiencies and the way that they're approaching this plan are more to help the organization operate within the financial constraints, given that in many areas costs are going up higher than budget allocations are going. So it's not that you can take those efficiencies to the bank and cash in on them and count the dollar savings. It really is focused on helping us continue to maintain service levels with all of the pressures and increasing expectations from the community, growth, those things, so that we can continue to operate. So we haven't attempted to quantify that, and I don't know that it's possible.
Okay, I can appreciate that, because I really think that there is some efficiencies being created by having this business plan, and whether we can measure that is another story. But I think it's important that that message is put across, and when it's appropriate, I would like to move the recommendation.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. I want to ask just about the terms of efficiency or terms of resources. I would like to see that pie chart that you created using the number of projects in terms of where they fit in our community priorities. I was wondering if it'd be possible to see at some point down the line a pie chart that shows the number of resources, like the dollar figures that are being allocated, and just to understand how that works out. My other question is, or not question, but just comment, is just to say, you know, I think it's great and moving in the right direction that we're going to be evaluating the different projects as we go forward, evaluating the business plans, and I'm very encouraged to see that. So thank you.
Okay, I'll leave it to staff to connect later on in terms of the graphic representation of the pie charts. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I have a number of questions. I'm still not sure I fully understand everything. There seems to be an awful lot of work involved with this. Can you give me some idea of how many person hours of work this has taken, or how much time does all of this take? It seems like an awful lot of work. And without we have yet to go into the performance measurement. I'm curious also with the performance measurement that looking over what you're planning to, how you plan to assess things, you know, how many hours of work is all of this taking? Do we have any idea how many FTEs are involved to run this process?
So the question then is, how long does it take just to put together this business plan in general?
Well, yeah, how much time have we spent? How much time is it going to take us to monitor it? And the whole new issue is the performance. How are we doing? You know, how much time is that going to take to assess?
Okay, I'm not sure staff would have that handy, but I would look. Through you, Mr. Chair, I can say that a portion of my role is committed to planning, developing, and managing and monitoring this process. And I do have one staff member who I think you've met through the strategy session who does support me in that. Most of the work, there are many people who are involved in this process, but I would say that it's very difficult to separate out this work from the work of just managing this organization. This is important work that needs to be done, and I think what we're doing is, through the business planning process, is encouraging that work to become open, and but through documenting it and sharing it with council, and encouraging communication and sharing of that information within the organization to improve the effectiveness of these management practices. So the majority of the work that goes into planning what we do and what we're going to take on would happen anyway. It's absolutely necessary function for any organization. So it's difficult to quantify the effort that goes in to make it as good as it is through the business plan that you're seeing today.
Do we have any idea how long it's going to take us to do these performance measurements?
We haven't quantified that, the amount of effort that goes into that, but I can tell you I've sat down with the directors that have made a commitment to sharing, collecting, and managing and sharing this information. And most of them do keep track of this information anyway. It is part of managing their business and making sure that they're on track. And many of these, this data is collected for other purposes and to report in other ways. And so I think the additional investment that's going into it above and beyond what we would normally do is manageable, and certainly everyone feels that is a value add.
I don't question that, the value added. But did I understand that on these performance measurement follow-ups, we're not going to hear anything until 2016?
We will start to collect the data on these metrics starting this month in January, and we'll report on a full year of performance in 2016. Yes.
Okay. So there on 3.5, you looking at the financial implications. You comment on how they. I'm just trying to tie them into the list of 29. Corporate plans. I can see where traffic calming goes. I see where trails and walkways. Urban forest, I'm not sure which plan it comes under. Can you help me with that? Where's the 200,000 for the urban forest come into play on those 29 items?
Okay, on the urban forest, through you, Mr. Chair, that's related to project number 88, which is develop a proactive forestry maintenance program, which is priority 3 on the corporate projects.
The economic development, where is that showing on here in the 29 projects?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, these projects are ones that affect core service, not projects. These budget requests, they are issue papers that are related more to the description that's provided in the core service, and this budget request is not related to a specific project.
Okay, so they really have nothing to do with this, basically.
The 4 that are listed there under the heading of not built into the 2015 budget, the first 4 are related to core service and not projects, and so you won't see those showing up in the corporate priority list.
Okay, then if I look at the
Councillor Gazzola, your time's expired. Do you have any more questions?
Yes, I do, and I'll.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Councillor Gallery-Seelock.
Yeah, really good report. It really helps put everything into perspective. I was just wondering if I could get staff to bring back a report to see if something would fit into the work plan and do a review on what the city does and options. And really that's related to rat infestations throughout the city. It seems to be becoming more prevalent, and I keep hearing about it more and more. So I guess just through this process, whether it comes back with budget or whether it comes back after, just what the city does, if there are options, or if we have the capacity to do a review over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Laurie, thanks for the report. Just a couple of basic questions, and I think I know the answers. I just want to probe just a little on the determination of these priorities for the budget. Were they determined by the corporate leadership team?
Yes, the discussion and decision on the priorities was made by the corporate leadership team.
And have councillors had any say on picking those number 1 priorities?
As for you, Mr. Chair, one of the purposes of this discussion and bringing the business plan here today is to get council's input on those priorities.
But why would we be voting on this today when issue papers may change our minds on which projects will be considered? Issue papers we have not seen.
Sorry, Councillor Etherington, it is subject to final budget approval.
Okay, thank you. On page 3-4, can Council change those 6 number 1 priorities?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're looking for your input and feedback on the priorities, and if you would like us to reconsider the priorities of the corporate projects, we will take that feedback and look at what we can do to accommodate that.
And can you tell me why the one that I'm particularly interested in, the incentives for low-cost housing, why is that not a number 1 priority when it did have on Council's 12 priorities? I believe it was number 5 with one of the highest scores. Can you tell me why that is?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did incorporate Council's priorities in the order that they were ranked according to the points that were allocated through the Council feedback. And so while it was number 5, it certainly had fewer points than the development of alternative traffic calming options, and so it is lower on the priority list than that. As the person who's managing the process, it is my preference, and I think it's more effective to have a smaller number of priority 1 priorities so that we can focus on those and make sure that those get the attention that they need by including, expanding that list to include, 10, 12, 14 projects. It sort of dilutes the importance of being a priority 1. So we did draw the line at 6.
No, I recognize that. I would like to see it as one of the 6, but maybe I can talk about that later as we get into these. Thanks very much for your help.
Councillor Fernandez?
Thank you. I'm sorry, Laurie, I missed your presentation. I was waiting for a furnace without heat all weekend and ready to have some heat in the house. So the business plan, my understanding when I speak to business people, is part of moving forward any organization. And so I understand the rationale behind it. But I think the difference here is that we are more customer service oriented as opposed to a business that's producing a product. Would that be a correct assumption or realization to come to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think there are many, many differences between a sort of private sector business plan and a local government business plan. I've spent the biggest part of my career studying these things and trying to understand them and looking where we can apply private sector practices to local government to improve things. So I don't think I would agree that that's the primary difference. I think there are many differences that make a government business plan look different than what you might expect in the private sector.
I'd be interested, can you share some of the differences that you've seen? Like the ones that stand out to you?
I'm not sure I can do that with in the time that we have today, but I certainly would be willing to prepare something for council and circulate that. I think primarily a business plan in the private sector for a for-profit business, I'd say the primary difference is that the objective is to generate profit. Mm-hmm. The objective is financial, and the focus is on the marketing strategy and the investment and the return on investment. In local government, we do have a return on investment, but that return on investment is not in the form of profit; it's in the form of community value and the services that we are able to deliver to the community and the value that creates in the community for individuals and the community as a whole. So the focus is quite different. You won't see a marketing component to this business plan and those sorts of things. It is very different, but it does, the commonality is that it does lead and guide the direction of the organization, and does give a clear path for how resources will be used to generate that value or that return on investment in the community.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. And I would be. I don't know about the rest of council, but I'd be very interested to learn some more about what you've learned about the distinct differences between private industry and public sector work. But one of the things that I do know, and again, this has been in discussions this weekend with business people who own businesses or who work at a higher level within a business. Business plans always come with financials. I understand that this is sort of the precursor to our budget, but there's not a lot of financials components to this, and so I'm kind of wondering why that doesn't happen here. An understanding about what the cost of each department is, or what their budget is. You've got what the core services are, and you're describing for us things like the different. I just flipped to one page, which is economic development. Not that I'm picking on that particular area, but you're talking about the building permits. You're talking about inquiries and performances downtown and customers at the market. How does that tie into the financial expenditures of our city? And I think that would be an important component for us and for the public to understand. What does it cost to run that service? And a little bit maybe off of the question from Councillor Ioannidis, where do we see the efficiencies? And I know you did answer, you said that it's difficult to quantify that within a dollar figure. But I still think that something needs to be tied to financials, so I'm wondering how we could do that. Has that ever been discussed? Has that been considered?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is an objective of the work that we're doing on the business plan, is to integrate it better with the budget so that it is easier for people to see those connections and understand the relationship between the resources that are invested and the value that's generated through these services and projects. It has been, to this point, there are two separate processes. We do them in parallel, and they do speak to each other, but in terms of bringing the information together, we haven't yet made decisions on how that should and could happen, and that is probably the biggest challenge for this process for 2015, is to look at those opportunities and to gradually bring those two processes closer together.
I know my time is up, but I will queue in again.
Okay, there are 4 people still in the queue. Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Laurie, thank you for this document and the presentation, the work that's gone into establishing this. I see this document as probably being one of the most important ones that this council will have opportunity to give direction and guidance and establish as a form of a very transparent aspect of what this organization does and where the priorities lie and where it will head towards in the next 4 years and beyond that as well. And so speaking to that, will this document be somehow very clearly available online so that our citizens can have the same level of privilege of being able to see exactly, I'm more speaking to the actual business plan. Are we taking steps to do that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, last year we did post the business plan on the city's website, and we do intend to do that again this year. It is a challenge for people to try and find it on there, and
that's why I asked. Yeah.
Yes. So, I will explore other opportunities for making sure that we can get it out there. I think currently you'll notice one of the projects on the business plan is a review of the city's internet site. So, with the objective of making information like this easier to find for the public. And I'm confident that this will certainly be one of those things that...
Well, I'll leave it in staff's capable hands and making sure that that is the case, that it is very easily found and it's clear. And I think it's an opportunity that the council members should take in advising our citizens that it sits there, that they can better educate themselves, and it allows us to do our job better too when we can refer them to a document such as this. And one last question, similar to Councillor Etherington, on the priorities. I had the same thing. I appreciate that of the 12 priorities that the council was able to comment on have been incorporated in this, the 2015 corporate project list of the 29 major priorities. But the allocation and from priority 1 to priority 4, that's something that I had still anticipated that council would have had a greater input process in establishing that priority. I don't think today's probably the day, because based on the time allocation for this is the first time that we're seeing this. Will we have another opportunity prior to budget, or even if it doesn't have to be, even if it's after, that council can have greater dialogue as to how do we establish this priority, and not just be left to corporate leadership to decide the final outcome?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I am absolutely open to any suggestions or direction from council in terms of how we establish the priorities, if that was your question, in terms of the council's involvement in that. And this process is evolving, and as you have probably noticed already, we do try to make this a more meaningful experience for both council and the public every year. If you would like to give direction on adjusting the priorities that are in the 2015 business plan, I was hoping that today would be an opportunity for you to consider that and discuss it. And
I don't see today as really an opportunity for a larger, wholesome dialogue. And there's a lot of writing on this. This is very important work. And so that's my opinion. I'll leave it to council how we want to decide if direction needs to be given. But I would hope that there's a later opportunity where we will give the appropriate time necessary to make the necessary recommendations if there are changes that need to be made. Or if I know, a more extensive discussion, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Mr. Wilmer, can you help us out in this?
Through the chair, I think that the fact that these are on the list of 2015 corporate projects is the key factor. If it wasn't on the list and you think it's important, then we need to have a conversation. But whether it's a priority 1 or 2, 2 or 3, I don't know that there is a lot riding on that. Our track record is that we will deliver on all of these projects this year, except perhaps some of the priority 4s, which we'll get started on and not complete.
Okay.
But,
well,
I think the fact is you can take comfort in knowing that these are on the list.
Yeah, well, that's great. And that's really what I was looking at, thinking that if it's just something's higher, that it may maybe the most amount of effort given to that as opposed to something else that may be left out. But if that's the case, and staff is giving confidence that good effort will be made to make sure that all of this will be captured, that gives me confidence. The last point I want to know is at what step will we have a in-between update, knowing exactly what's happening how we're moving forward on these priorities?
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. The business planning process includes monitoring of corporate projects on a monthly basis and reporting to council and the public every 4 months. Yeah. And that report comes forward with the budget variance reports, usually at the same time. So there's 3 times a year where you will know whether the project is on track. There are times when projects are on hold or delayed for reasons, and if the status is anything other than on track, you will be given an explanation for that. As part of those status updates, you also get to understand what the key accomplishments have been in the past 4 months and what the key planned activities are for the coming 4 months. So.
Okay, and that's what I had anticipated. I just wanted to make sure that was the case. Thank you.
Mayor Verbenovich.
Thank you very much, Chair Davey, and thank you for the comprehensive report. Just building on the questions that have been asked and also on Mr. Wilmer's response, I too now have some comfort that all of this will happen in 2015. The question I have is part of what sort of impacting the prioritization really how this may relate to other work that's being done. So, for example, and I share Councillor Etherington's, importance around the incentives for affordable housing, but that links into our zoning bylaw review, which is occurring this year. And is that partially how you determine sort of where it fits in terms of 1, 2, 3, or 4?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, Mayor Verbenovich, that is correct. There are a number of factors. I think, to give you further reassurance, corporate projects, the 29 corporate projects out of the 104 that are on this business plan are absolutely the top priority, are managed more carefully and closely and regularly to make sure they stay on track. So it's highly unusual for corporate projects not to be completed as planned because they're given that attention. The difference between the ranking, it's sometimes there are 2 or 3 projects on this list that are the responsibility of a single division, and it's important for them to know, even within the projects they're responsible for, which ones take priority. In addition, it also does, as you have mentioned, as Mayor Vrbanovich has mentioned, that it does help them keep it in perspective with the other projects that they're managing.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had, just in terms of this kind of work and the importance and value that it has, for any organization that's trying to operate as leanly as possible. How important is it to spend time and invest some resources into this kind of work planning, both from a transparency point of view, but as well as an effective tool to assist management in the work that they do?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, well, I may be a bit biased in my response because I've really committed my whole career to this type of work, so obviously I believe it's important. But just in my experience, trying to speak objectively, the City of Kitchener, as well as all cities now in North America, are struggling with resources. And when you're in that situation, you have to make very deliberate decisions about what you will do and what you will not do. And there are tons of things that this organization could do, and that people want to do, and that citizens want us to do. And a plan like this helps us stay focused on those decisions that we've made deliberately in terms of what we will do, so that we don't get distracted and get pulled in 100 and different directions that work at cross purposes to this. This helps us get done what we plan to get done, and by bringing that transparency to the process and accountability by monitoring it, it makes sure that everyone understands what is getting done and getting a focus on completing what we start before we take on things that may be of a lower priority.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, very quickly, just in terms of the communication around this, and you touched on it, but I'm wondering if one of the things we can do, if it's hard to, for people to find it on the web, and you'll work at making that easier, but could we look at working with communications to perhaps have a synopsis of this document and of our 2015 priorities in the next issue of Your Kitchener, and then refer them to the website if they want more detailed information?
Yes, I can certainly do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there are 4 people in the queue. Councillor Gazzola.
I want to go back to some questions I was asking, going back to page 3.6. There were 3 items there that I was trying to relate to the 29 corporate projects. Item number 6, it says Project 12, and I don't see Project 12 on the list there.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, Project 12 is not a corporate project. It is a divisional project. So it does require resources attached to it, but it is one of the 104 projects, but not one of the 29 corporate projects.
So it goes above these 4 groupings of priorities. It's even more. It's a plus one. Is that it? Okay, I keep moving here. My time's floating away here. Item number 7, it says Business Plan Project 89. When I look at 89, it talks about community gardens. Is that one and the same thing there? Or?
Okay. Oh, I apologize. Through you, Mr. Chair, that should say project number 88. That is an error. We apologize for that.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. there's somewhat of a clarification coming. I wondered if all the ones should be completed before starting on the seconds and so forth. What I'm hearing is that you're going to do them all, so the priority listings don't have that great an impact because they're all going to be done this year. Is that right? Am I hearing right?
The commitment is everything in this business plan. The organization has made a commitment to take action on in 2015. Priorities, the identification of priorities just helps us manage, from day to day, week to week in terms of where we focus our resources. But the commitment is to take action on everything in this business plan in 2015.
Yeah, but what does take action mean? Are you going to complete all the ones before you move on to the twos or what have you? Take action means you sit down and spend some time on it and then you've taken action. But does that mean to complete all of these?
The reason why I didn't use the word complete is because a number of the projects in this plan are not expected to be complete until 2016. We will start working on them and we will make progress and we'll report on that progress 3 times a year to council and the public, but some of the projects may not be completed until 2016.
Okay, one final question, and then I do want to make some point of comment, but I'll start a new 5-minute. We have 29 projects here. Do we have any idea of how much time will be involved to complete these 29 projects?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have not done an accounting of the time required to do the projects, no.
So it may be well impossible to complete them all or half of them, or if we don't know how much time is involved or required. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say that that's correct. I would say that before we've spent 6 months developing this plan. Before the projects end up in this report and as a part of the proposed business plan, there has been a significant amount of thought given to the capacity in each division to take on the projects, the number of people that will be involved, and the amount of work. We don't have a documented accounting of the specific amount of time for each project, but there certainly has been significant thought and discussion and dialogue around whether or not we have the capacity to do them. And at this point, I would say, failing a number of other major things coming up, that what we are putting forward in front of you today represents a plan that is achievable.
Thank you. I do have a comment at some time.
Yeah, I'll come back to comment. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Just an additional comment and question. Just so, as I was reading the descriptions of all these projects, I found myself wondering, which of the corporate and divisional projects are intended to be outsourced or, intended to be contracted out. And I of course appreciate staff's ongoing efforts to ensure that we are efficient in our work, and some of the nature of many of these projects may of course require external resources to be brought in to help. However, I think it would be important for staff to ensure that they're looking at whether or not we could bring on additional staff, contract staff within the organization and reorganize a little bit about who does what within our staff resources, rather than defaulting to contracting out more than is required. So I just wanted to make a note of that and perhaps ask if it would be possible to get a sense of which projects are planned to be outsourced.
I would suggest that it's a good point, but I would suggest that being that I think all of these items at some point will be coming back, well, almost all of them will be coming back to council or committee or council. That would be the time to scrutinize the specific implementation.
Okay.
So it's a good point. I think staff will take it back, but
okay.
Scrutinizing the individual items as they come back would be the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez?
I'm just going to leapfrog off of Councillor Marsh's question, because I think that that's important for us to understand if there's an opportunity for reallocation of staff time. When I look at some of the projects that are on page 3.5 that are not built into the budget, and I know that there are possible staffing additions needed for these projects to move forward. And I spoke to Mr. Wilmer about this as well, that maybe we should take this as an opportunity to look at staff reallocation. Sorry, that's not a question for you, Laurie. Is this the time for us to be asking questions of each department as I've tabbed through the report, or are we doing... I think that it's important for not only the public but also the rest of council to hear some of the questions that may be raised over different departments.
If it relates to approving the business plan or changing the business plan, yes, but it's not an opportunity to ask about. There's literally, we could spend the entire day asking 1,000 questions about the 1,000 different items. Mm-hmm. So if it's questions of clarification or something, I would suggest that you take those up with staff offline if you have concerns in that respect.
Okay, well,
this is really just about approving.
Why don't I give you an example of one that I'm curious about,
sure.
and then I can hear whether that I'm off base here. So on page 3-83, it's the end of the report, under divisional projects, number 100, and it talks about...
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the page number?
Yep, 83, sorry.
83?
83, and under divisional projects, number 100, and it's called street renaming policy. So as I'm reading this and I'm thinking, okay, how is this critical to the function of the city? Is this a good use of staff resource time? And again, I apologize, Laurie, because I know that this is out of your purview, but I know that some staff is here for that, and I think it's important.
Mr. Wilmer, do you want to comment on that?
So just through the chair, this has been bumped as less than the highest priority for many years. And so as an example, I'll refer to Glasgow Street. Glasgow Street was bisected by University Avenue. It was bisected again by Iron Needles Boulevard. There are different portions of Glasgow Street that don't connect with each other. Mm-hmm. And because we didn't have a policy at the time that council was approving plans of subdivision, the city wasn't proactive at renaming non-contiguous portions of the street. It is important for emergency service response. If they're responding to an address on Glasgow Street and are heading down Glasgow Street, then get to Fisher-Hallman or University and the numbers end and they haven't got to that number yet. So that's an example as to why we should be doing better than we are. I would agree with you that this may not be the highest priority, but this has been languishing for about 10 years or more, and we haven't gotten around to it yet. Eventually it becomes something that we can't afford to ignore much longer.
Okay.
So let's, using that as an example then,
Yep.
I'll pause your time here, but using that as an example, that's a good question and good rationale coming back. Clearly you can't have a report that includes all of that detail when it's supposed to, the intent is a business plan quick reference. Okay. So I would suggest if anyone has any specific issues or items with any of these, and questions of clarification, I would ask that you follow up with staff, and then if you have a sincere concern, then you could be brought up on final budget day, rather than going through the 100+ items.
Okay, and my concern about bringing back to final budget day is there are numerous areas here that I have concerns about the rationale for the whether it's a visible benefit or, for example, a visible benefit on page 81 talks about trails and walkways and forestry maintenance product. Those are visible benefits. Those are benefits that our citizens see right away. Renaming of a street, I don't know that they would see a visible benefit. So part of my scrutiny when I'm looking through this business plan is I'm judging it on a visible benefit for our citizens, or something that makes their life easier when they're traveling through our city, or they're when they pay their taxes. They say, okay, I've seen boulevard trees being repaired here. I've seen my response to a particular issue or concern. There was one item here that said 14 days on page 3-64. days to fix defects once detected on sidewalks. 14 days. I mean, I need rationale to understand what that means. And so for me to approve a business plan when I have so many questions, it doesn't seem logical or rational, to be quite honest with you. And I know that there's been a lot of time put into this. So it deserves to have the amount of time discussed to it, and 30 minutes is not a reasonable allocation for that. So
again, on my committee's discretion, I don't think we can today go through each individual item and scrutinize it. I mean, for example, the item you brought up, that on 364, 14 days, there's a provincial, for accessibility requirements, there's a provincial legislation says we have to deal with the sidewalk within a certain amount of time. That's why you see that sort of ugly asphalt patching. And as I said, there's rationale for all of these items, but I guess I'm not sure what the solution is if we want to go through each of them today versus each individual councillor discussing them, because I'm not sure each member of committee wants to hear the rationale for all of them. A lot of us understand them. So if you have a specific question, I suggest that you take it up on your
okay,
own time.
and I don't disagree with you, but I think maybe one of the other opportunities that we could or should consider before we approve the business plan is that all the questions that council may have had, we've had this business plan for a couple of weeks now, that they all should have been filtered, especially like the detailed questions like this, could have been filtered to Laurie, and Laurie could have shared them out to the different divisions, and then we could have all had a response back. So I wouldn't be wasting time asking, individual questions like this. And certainly I will, take the time to write emails and find more details, but I want to make sure that all of council hears it and that the public hears it. Some of these are maybe questions that they need to know, have answered for themselves. So is that something we can put into place? I guess would be the question out of all of this rambling.
Mayor Rabanovich, clarification.
Well, and Mr. Chair, I guess I'm looking to your discretion on this, but my point around asking for a point of clarification is really to remind all of ourselves to ask ourselves the question of what's the role of council versus what's the role of management. And I think, with the level of detail that we're getting into, we're getting into the role of management potentially. Our role is to set the budget, to set the broad direction of the city, to hire the CAO, and to monitor all those things. Our role isn't to get into the specific detail about every individual issue and, why it's being done and how it should be done and the timing of it and all those things. I mean, we pay people good money to do that work and as professionals to lead that in our community on behalf of our citizens. And so I think it's important that we keep in mind what our role is versus the role of staff in some of these areas.
Can I respond?
Before, you may, but I'd just chime in as well. I agree, and that was sort of my point, that we shouldn't be looking at this as a committee, because we are supposed to be having the high level sort of direction and input. That's why I suggested if you individually want to follow up, I would never suggest that a member of council or committee couldn't ask questions of staff and get responses. I'm just saying it's not what we as a committee should be doing. We're supposed to be looking at the high level of this. So please respond.
Okay, so one of the comments that Mayor Verbenevich stated was to monitor. Outside of the other words that were used in your point of clarification, it is to me, and I think to some members of council that I've heard from in the last 4 years, critical to monitor the expenditures of this city and to make sure that there's a good rationale, because when we're asked a question like one I got this morning of why have I not gotten a salt sandbox on my street when I've asked 3 times for it, so that means that requires us to go back to staff and ask the question. And so we need to understand the rationale, the monitoring of the situation, and the response to the resident. So all of those are, in my opinion, necessary to make a good, responsible decision around how we plan our business plan and how that ties into our budget.
Okay, thank you. We'll continue. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm looking for some guidance on this. I tend to agree with Councillor Fernandez. I think we're putting the cart before the horse here. The expectation seems to be that we approve this business plan. So you're asking me to approve this and forward it on when I disagree with the ratings and priorities. So what do? Do I vote against the plan, which is ridiculous, or can we not find a way to deal with this other than on budget day when I know it won't get the attention it deserves? So I don't know where to go. I'm looking for guidance on that, and a quick comment in response to the mayor's earlier comments. In my opinion, these ratings have to do quite often with money and where we want to spend the money. So if I happen to think the housing incentive issue is worth spending money on instead of other number one priorities, I want a chance to get at that. And I'm not sure I'm going to get at that in a day where we're occupied in full with budget debates.
Sure. So I'll respond from my vantage. There are, and we sort of went through this when we listed our 12 priorities back in December. I think it's committee's responsibility to accept the fact that not every item is going to be where we would like it to be. That's why we sort of voted on it as a whole. And certainly there are items on that list that I won't mention them, but I really have very little interest in seeing them progress, but there are others that I do like to see progress. So as a committee, we have to either accept the staff's hierarchy or question it and come back if we have a very serious issue. But otherwise, I would suggest that we have to move forward. It's the only way that we can cohesively work as a committee. Because the alternative is we sit here all day and pick out any number of these items and say, I would like to see this go from a number 3 to a number 1, or this from a number 1 to a number 4, or even worse, I think, in terms of our collective decisions, see something come off the list entirely. I don't think that's something that we really want to get into. We have to accept what the committees has put forward in the past.
I agree with that, but I noticed that this recommendation does in fact say that the plan will incorporate any necessary adjustments resulting from budget decisions. So that's the first paragraph. So presumably we will be getting into that on budget day.
Right. We will not be voting on anything today, just to be clear. It's just for discussion today. We will be voting on it on final budget day.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm on to my comments.
Please are the last one, so...
They'll be the last ones, not maybe for the day, but for now. I just want to comment on the mayor's comments, too, that, yes, a lot of things he says are correct, but the big item is that the buck stops with council. Council is responsible for everything that happens in this city. So that's something to keep in mind. I just want to make a quick comment on this whole issue. I found that all the work that has been done was excellent. I'm still from the era that a lot of people, I think, are, where we talk about parks and recreation, public works, planning departments. I've really, in the period since I've been on this side of the fence, have lost track of who does what. I know, for example, IT was bounced from one division to another, and it's an excellent layout of who does what and how many people are involved and what your plans are, and I think that is great. However, sometimes planning can get carried away, and we really do need to know how much time are we involving with all of this. We have to measure, yes, probably something like this is good, but there comes a time when we spend so much time on planning that we're not doing the things we should do. So these are the reasons why we need to know how much time are these things going to take. And then my final point is, I have been trying for years to get monthly financial statements. We're getting all of this information, but here we are, a billion-dollar corporation, and we don't have monthly financial statements. I can find out thousands of other things, but it's sad when I think that the last set of financial statements for 2014 were the August 31 statements. So really, how does all this fit together? And how do we keep going down the road of not preparing simple monthly financial statements?
Thank you. Councillor Yaneski.
Yes, thank you. I didn't have any questions to ask, as I understood the plan and I could appreciate the concerns that were raised by the rest of councillors in terms of concerns of this report. Like Councillor Gazzola, having been a staff person for several decades, I can appreciate the work that's involved in different departments, their responsibilities, their roles, the number of staff involved, and etc. The report, as outlined in each department's role and priorities that have been set out here, are clear and understandable, as I would see it. And I think the direction it's going is in the right direction. The priorities that have been identified here, and not everybody agrees upon them, and I can appreciate that only because each individual councillor may have certain preferences to bump certain ones up because they think they're more important than other councillors may feel there's other items that are more important and they should be bumped up. And if we keep bumping everything else up, all those bumps will be all number one. We can't quite do that. But anyways, as pointed out by staff, these are intended to be addressed over the next couple years. And of course, not one will be done individually at a time. There will be a whole bunch that are being done by different departments, different sections, and they'll be ongoing and will be intended to be addressed and delivered in the end. So my basic statement basically is that I think that the report is well done. I think that a hell of a lot of work went into this in terms of numerous hours. I know you couldn't answer how much was that you put in, although that was a major chunk of your responsibility. And of course, you need the responsibility and the help of all the other departments and divisions to pull this together, because you have to rely on them for the background and the basis and what they feel are priorities, and then tie it all in with the overall team. So those are my comments. I know this is just for discussion purposes, and it's not perfect for everybody's taste, but I think we're headed in the right direction.
Thank you. I would actually echo several of Councillor Yaneski's comments. I find it a bit interesting listening to some of the comments. Some folks are concerned about the cost of this. Others are asking for additional information in terms of charts and integrating the finances and outcome measurement, which invariably would add to the cost of it as well. So I think we're probably right where we should be in terms of this document. I think it was well done, and I also believe that the key to any successful organization is its focus, and this document really provides the focus for the City of Kitchener. So I intend to approve it as is come final budget day. Okay. Moving along, we are moving on to item number 4, the Upper Dune Heritage Conservation District Review, and I think Mr. Pignard will... There's no vote on that list today, no. If you want to click in, Councillor Gazzola?
I have to gather from everybody whether they're supporting it or not supporting it. We don't take votes anymore. I don't understand.
No, we're voting. This was for discussion today to hopefully cut off some of the discussion on final budget day, and final budget day will be voting on it. Okay. Mr. Pignard, did you want to introduce the item before we get to our delegations? Oh, sorry. Thanks, Larry.
I can do that, Chair Davey. So good morning. So this report is in response to a council motion that was referred to this committee meeting. And the subject of the motion is to take action on the Heritage Conservation District in Upper Doon. Staff do agree that it is appropriate to update the planning framework in Upper Doon, including the Heritage Conservation District. However, staff is recommending some revisions to the motion, and I am going to explain those revisions. There are 3 parts to the recommendation. The first 2 parts to the recommendation are new, and they are new actions that can be taken immediately. And they would have an impact right away. What was asked for in the original motion, which is to update the Upper Doon Heritage Conservation District, is actually included in the 3rd part of the recommendation. However, it's included as part of a broader and more robust planning framework. Staff is bringing this together as one package. By doing it this way, staff would not be disrupting its work program. It would actually be presenting something that is more robust at the end. It would include an update to the Upper Doon Heritage Conservation District plan, and it would also put us on a stronger legal footing in the event of an appeal, because many of the items that have been discussed, including the Upper Doon Heritage Conservation District, is something that is subject to appeal. And staff believe that the more robust plan that would actually have some framework surrounding the plan and that would actually help justify the updates to the plan, and would do so in a way that maximizes the efficient use of our resources, is a stronger and more efficient way to move forward. So that is essentially the recommendation. It's a 3-part recommendation, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pinard. Before we get to questions, actually, we do have 2 delegations. And we'll begin with Ms. Jean Helbroom.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Davey and members of committee. So first of all, I'd like to make a few comments about the staff report and the Upper Doon Conservation District review. And page 4.2 of the staff report, we read the deferred motion of the December 15th council meeting. And I'd like to say that it is very specific, and one which the Upper Doon delegates at the time of council understood and supported. The motion before you, or the recommendation, is somewhat general. However, I made it my business to have a dialogue with planning staff, the authors of this report, and one is here, Alain. And I now have some understanding of how the work or the specifics of the December 15th motion are to be accomplished, and that planning staff can accomplish the work because the items are already in the planning department's work plan as outlined on page 4 for the directions of your staff report. So covered is the residential infill and tools to accomplish it. There will be a cultural heritage, a landscape study implementation, and we're really pleased to know that Upper Doon Conservation District is on the cultural heritage landscape list. And last of all, we're going to be working on urban design for infill. So as a committee, I suggest and I encourage you to support this recommendation before you. However, something I'd like to share with you to reflect upon with respect to the recommendations and Upper Doon's Heritage Conservation District. Successful heritage designation of a property or an area such as a Heritage Conservation District plan, is a lot like winning your councillor seat, and even bigger, the mayor's seat. It takes night and day attention, phone calls, sharing information, meetings, and events. To establish the Upper Doon Heritage Conservation District, the first district in the city of Kitchener in 1988, took work just like I described. From 1983 to 1988, Upper Doon residents visited heritage districts in Meadowvale Village and Bayfield. We invited guest speakers from the Ministry of Culture. We talked with architects such as Nicholas Hill, Chris Borgel, and Carlos Venton. Our neighbors met one-on-one with fellow participants and neighbors to share and discuss the information and benefits of a district and its plan. We, in spite of the fact that a study was done by your Nicholas Hill, hired by the city, we hired a professional planner. We had to do this, such as the late George Rich, and University of Waterloo planning school professor. And those who are in planning degrees, you'll recognize Mr. Rich's name. We dealt with the big-time developer, Monarch Homes, and some of the little developers around. Finally, after all this work in 1988, we attended a hearing before the OMB to approve the plan. There were no objections, not even from the developers. They did not show up. This is unusual, I find. We in Upper Doon all understood the plan's language. We understand it, it's clear. So with regard to the work plan, number one on our neighborhoods list is to move forward with the work plan, but there's an immediate need for a dialogue and communication with staff to find out what it is in the plan that needs to be clearer, or with more legislation or legal background or support. Number two, there needs to be a discussion with staff about the GRCA and Public Works grading requirements. These requirements can impact the height of a structure, and it's happened already. The final height of a building or property could end up 6 to 15 feet higher than the approved height in your permit application. Number three, conservation, not demolition. Reduce, reuse, recycle. We have this for garbage, we have it for papers, we have it for organic material. Conservation for housing needs to be our first response to applicants wanting a change for a structure or a new structure. If not, Upper Doon stands to lose 13 1950s bungalows and 4 wartime houses, which today are regarded as heritage resources and structures in the city. Number 4, implementation. Several items such as a garden guidebook, fence guidebook, and landscape plan have never been implemented in 26 years. Now back to the motion in front of you. It's very good to see the stated involvement of the ward councillor from the outset of any applications. So I encourage you, support the motion or the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. Haldeman? There are some.
And excuse me, Mr. Chair, I do have a copy of my presentation for your records, and I'll get that for the clerk here.
Very good, thank you. Questions?
Sorry.
No problem. Questions, Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, through you, Chair Davey. So you support the recommendation
Yes.
that's here before us, but the way you're describing your your presentation, it sounds like there's a lot of work. So it sort of seems opposite of what you're supporting here. So can you just give me?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, through to Mr. Councillor Unitas. No, I am not. I just want Council to be aware of all the effort that has been expended in the past. Okay. It's been a long time. We have not been here as a group. Our Society for the Preservation of Upper Doon, SPUD, formed in 1984. We used to be here before Council a lot. For those staff people who've been around, and some councillors who were staff people will recall how many times we've been here. But I think what needs to be understood is the amount of effort and the understanding of the people. And we're kind of taken aback to hear that the plan isn't clear enough. So I just wanted to share that with you, Councillor Unitas.
Okay. And I don't disagree with you on the plan's not clear enough. So as a priority, you're okay with the way this is set out as a priority, that this will be in the near future that it'll be looked at?
Through to Councillor Unitas. Yes, but I feel there needs to be an immediate contact with staff. We haven't seen staff, and I understand time commitments and restrictions, and I know from your business plan that there's a lot of work to be done. And I also I did attend the first Heritage meeting, not that I'm a member, but I wanted to see what the roles and responsibilities would be and the work plan. And I see it's filled, and I've talked with staff, and so I do see that it's time consuming, but really we need to have dialogue with staff. We need to have, at the outset, communication. We need to, have this exchange of ideas. Never mind all the plans and regulations. Yes, that comes later, but we need to have a dialogue to see where staff is coming from and what we understand and get this about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you, Jean, for coming in and your detailed example of what's happened in the past. One of the questions I have is regarding the GRCA and conversations. I wasn't clear. You said the height of the building could be significantly higher, and you used a number than what would be in the building permit process. Can you expand on that a little bit further?
So forgetting my protocol, Mr. Chairman, through to Councillor Fernandez. So in our area, we have properties of fringe floodplain. We have lots that are in floodplain. We have buildings which are in the floodplain already. And so with respect to the GRCA has no problem with allowing buildings or replacing, I don't like the word replacing, but if it so happens. In other words, if somebody builds on fringe floodplain, there is a policy to allow that. And I will give you an example, 1200 Doon Village Road. We look at the height of that particular property, and it's very close to the road, and everybody in the neighborhood has said, how did that house get there? Look at it. It's overwhelming the neighborhood. And when it was approved, there was no consideration, and I don't think Heritage Kitchener's job is to look at grading and all that, but permit application. So, because of where it sat, it is sitting at the edge of the floodplain, in the floodplain, so to speak, if you look at the floodplain mapping. And it can't have a basement, but it has to be flood-proofed. So the amount of fill that had to come in to allow this building to take place made the end result of the house sitting up, as you might say, on top of a mountain of earth. So it's 10 to 15 feet higher because of all the fill and the floodproofing than, say, the existing 1870 house down the street. If you measured, and I know this is a requirement from the Heritage Kitchener planners, that now we have a concern about height. So measure your building, and it can't be higher than whatever the highest house is next door. But if you really take into consideration of the fill that goes, in fact, this house ends up higher. So I look at the older 1870 house, I look at the new 2000s 1200 Dune Village Road. The height of the house is no higher if you take it by itself than the older one down the street. But because it has to go on top of the fill, it's mighty higher. Mm-hmm. So these are some of the things. Or, for instance, floodproofing, because of, I'll give you another example, not necessarily JRCA, but over the years the city has heightened the road. The road profile has it's higher. And so all our properties are down lower, the older ones. So when a new house was put in, and this is recently this past summer, there's a house there, and the property next to the older terrace, which is now 4 to 8 feet higher. The profile was 4 to 8 feet higher, and it's all about water. So, yes, you measure the height of the building, and yes, it's okay, but once you see the profile, the end result, there's definitely a change.
Okay, so I think one of the things that we also need to look at in this course of action would be a conversation with GRCA and making sure, and so I'm going to ask Mr. Pinard, how would we go about having that conversation? Because, I mean, myself, I've seen the significant difference.
So
and I know my time is up.
Yeah, no questions of staff right now either, just that we have another delegation.
Okay, that's fine. I'll hold that one. My time is off, but I will ask more questions of the other delegation. But thank you again, Jean, for coming in.
Right.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. You're happy with the recommendations that are in the report. You're happy, you're satisfied with the 4 classes of action that they're going to take. But what you're asking, though, that there be some sub-actions that they take, and you listed 4 items. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, through to Councillor Gazzola, yes. I believe that we need to have this communication sooner than later, before any work starts. I know how busy staff is. And I don't want staff to spend unnecessary time writing up and proposing something, and then there's meeting after meeting after meeting. I feel it's so much better to have this dialogue, and it's about time that we revisited the plan to talk about the areas. So I would like to see this dialogue to help us understand the clarity issues that are needed.
And so you're asking that planning staff meet with residents of your community?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, before they get into these other things.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
And I also, Councillor Gazzola, see that there's a pile of work. There are citywide initiatives that staff will be dealing with, that probably some of the work that they're doing can be applied and massaged to work through a satisfactory outcome with Upper Dune.
Thank you.
Councillor Uneski.
Thank you for coming in and making your presentation. And I agree where you're headed towards in terms of your comments and the recommendation here before us. One of the comments in the statement about the planning framework for the Upper Dune Heritage Plan that's been established with your significant input back in '88, when you want to revisit this, is it the objective, and is this the right direction to go to reopen it in a manner that it could be then contested and reviewed totally in terms of all the detail that's in there and updated through staff and working with the community, that it could be challenged at the board? Or would it be appropriate that through the discussions that you have with staff that it could be addressed through the zoning with special regulations imposed that could address the issues that have come up and deal with it in that manner? Which of the two ways do you think are the better way to go from your perspective?
So, Mr. Chair, through to Councillor Janecki, I do believe that the second comment, suggestion you make, would be a more favorable way to go. I feel that perhaps with the dialogue that we start, there might be ways of defining the words that are clear to any applicants in the area, neighbors in the area, the people. Perhaps we don't have to have such an overwhelming workload, but I feel through definition and clarification and the discussion of what is understood, we can accomplish that. I hesitate on zoning because, and with respect to specific numbers, I do know that across Ontario, and we have many conservation district plans now, that in some instances they have context sensitive zoning for heritage conservation districts. And perhaps rather than reinventing the wheel and spending a whole lot of time and energy, we could work on that and take it that way. But back to the zoning. I know that it probably is a lot easier if you have an equation for a person sitting, as a planner, But one of the things that we do have in Upper Dune, and this is the value of most people when they walk in the area, that they say it's unlike any neighborhood surrounding us, which you're aware is in all the new neighborhoods where you have, so many houses, so many lots, same lot sizes, same height, same side yards, whereas Upper Dune in the plan specifically says these are unique spaces, and if you look at the old community plan, you look on the map, the lots are existing there, and because of township zoning, you didn't get equal. It was different sizes, and so anyway. So I feel that we need to uphold and respond to that uniqueness. And one thing you could say, every house is supposed to be maximum height 30 feet. Well, guess what? They will build to 30 feet high. We don't want to see that. It's that kind of thing. So we need to be, I would say, there needs to be discussion and how if zoning is the way, we need to have a look. And I'd say, how do other places do it with the context-sensitive zoning and what's in place in other places. There are precedents. We can work on that.
One other question that I do have is in regard to the first recommendation here in terms of the ward councillor being involved, which is wonderful, the Upper Dune representative. The Upper Dune representative is selected for each of the heritage districts that we have in Kitchener, and of course Upper Dune has that responsibility as well. Your involvement in the initiation of SPUD back 30 years ago, would somebody from SPUD be one of those representatives, or would that something be in addition to? And you talk about we as working with staff. I'm not trying to identify who the we is, in terms of we being SPUD or we being the staff, the ward councillor, the rep, or what?
The rep could well be from SPUD. We're all members of SPUD. So the reps could be. And I have to bring this forward to you that I know your Heritage Kitchener bylaw says each district will have one rep on the committee. However, at the time of writing and in the bylaw 88-17, it recommends that there be 2 members from the district on the local Heritage Kitchener committee. So I will say if we are going to be successful of having representation, we need to know, again, that's a talking point about the roles and responsibility and the value of the comments by the reps that are on that committee.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in. There are no further questions. Ms. Helbum.
Thank you.
And the second final delegation, Richard Helbum.
I won't be very long, even though the bylaw is over 70 pages in length. My main submission is this. This Heritage District Bylaw 8817 was, as has been mentioned, was approved by the OMB back in 1988. It confirms the special sense of community that exists in Dune. It confirms for us residents of Upper Dune a special sense of place. That is why nothing should be changed in Upper Dune without thorough, open, and unbiased consultation with the residents of our neighbourhood. So that brings in with the representation, etc. The reason I say our homes in Upper Dune give us residents in Upper Dune a refuge from the congestion, the rush, and tension of modern urban life, and that's becoming more so the case all the time as I get older. It is the sharing of our community within the Upper Dune Heritage Conservation District which must be preserved. Sounds odd, but it's like me sitting at a ball game. I'm away from the rush of everything. I feel at home. That's why this current quest to have municipalities, and not just the district, approve demolition of existing homes in older neighborhoods in order to have some big money monster homes put up as an accepted way of doing things should be watched carefully. This kind of intrusion into a heritage district especially must not be approved except under very dire circumstances when an existing dwelling, as determined by third-party experts, not just the applicant, has absolutely, and that this house has absolutely no reasonable chance to be rehabilitated. And there's the last thing here. Keep in mind that the Ontario Heritage Act dominates over all other acts and regulations with respect to planning matters. And that's my opinion. I refer to that within a Heritage Conservation District. It's the chief law. In brief, the Ontario Heritage Act states in ordinary English under Section 68.3 that where or when there's a conflict between the Ontario Heritage Act or its regulations and any other act or its regulations, the Ontario Heritage Act shall prevail. And that's forgotten many times. In ordinary words, the Ontario Heritage Act trumps all other municipal bylaws, including Kitchener's official plan and its zoning bylaws, in my opinion, which may be found to conflict with any time it conflicts with the Ontario Heritage Act. And is our, meaning Upper Dunes and Kitchener, OMB approved Heritage Bylaw now in existence for over 25 years, which should not and must not be easily disregarded. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Fernandez.
I thought I was going to sneeze, sorry. Thank you, Richard, for coming in. You make a couple of really interesting points. And one I just want to expand a little bit on is when you talked about the demolition of properties being watched very carefully, you referred to a third-party expert. Can you help Council understand what you mean by a third-party expert?
Oh, I mean someone like an engineer who can, instead of the applicant saying this house, the basement's going, this is going, there's mold and all that, we need somebody who's objectively determinable of what's at issue with the houses. Because if I had my house and I want to tear it down, I can find all kinds of reasons for tearing it down, including the house in which I'm now living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's over 125 years old, so
can you help Council understand, and you may not exactly know, I mean, how many houses, but through sort of anecdotal evidence, the number of people that have lived in the area for a long time who've had to do numerous repairs and have continued to preserve their houses, whether it's a house from 100 years old or a house from 50 years old. Yeah. Can you give some anecdotal evidence to that?
But it'd be at least a dozen that I know of over the last 30, 40 years. I've lived there since 1976. So.
And what kind of repairs have you heard about that people have done to preserve their houses?
For example, our house is part of it is basement floor, natural floor, but made out of bricks instead of cement. Well, most modern way of looking at it would never be allowed in today's bylaws. You tear it down, moisture comes through these bricks. It is another way of getting it away through channelizing it. Wooden framed windows. They'll stand up. Ours are over 125 years old. How many homes that are 50 years old haven't had their windows replaced? There's, for example, storm windows that are used with vinyl siding. Well, we have that, but I don't like it. I'd like to have the old windows back that were there before. Mm-hmm. The storm windows, I mean. There's things like that, level of drainage for the water. This Upper Dune, for example, is in the valley. It's surrounded and through which, and it's 4 different creeks come through there, and it's hard to, surrounded by natural, and that luckily for us, nature kept modern suburbs away, except for one point, with an intrusion. That's what keeps Dune unique, and it should stay that way. And modernization, there's nothing wrong with it. The homes have the interior, everything that is needed in today's lifestyle, but it's still our way of life. And maybe that's a selfish way of looking at it, but that's how all neighborhoods tend to grow in time. We just happen to be older. Okay. Our neighborhood, including us.
Sorry, don't want to interrupt. One other question was, you talked about the Ontario Heritage Act dominates over all other planning acts, and you said sometimes that's forgotten. Can you just help? I mean, I agree with you completely. I think that we tend to, excuse me, exclude that or ignore that fact that it does supersede. And are you seeing, is that something that you're of great concern, because we are having people come in and say, you know what, I don't want this leaky basement, there's mold in this house, I want to demolish it, but they forget, and whether it's staff or even council forget that the Ontario Heritage Act supersedes all other acts.
That's correct. Even I've forgotten. It's a matter of law, so that if there's ever any conflict with another act, it'd be a good position for the Heritage Act to be in. And this act especially, it's been approved by the OMB, so you can't amend it without going back to the OMB. And doing that, relating very generally, if we open up this act, and it's a guideline, and guideline can be interpreted differently, you might be opening up, pardon the ordinary term, a can of worms.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in. I think you've enlightened all of us on some other issues.
So, thank you.
Councillor Yudesky.
Mr. Halbin, don't go away.
Mr. Halbin, you got one more question. Councillor Yudesky.
Sorry, Jake.
I do have a couple of questions. Just following up on the last question of Councillor Fernandez, and I just want to get a clarification to your answer on opening it up. You're saying opening up the act. or did you mean opening up the bylaw that approved the Upper Dune Heritage?
Yeah, opening up the bylaw, I mean, yes.
It's the bylaw you're
Yes.
talking about?
Yes, that's.
Okay, I wanted to get that
approved.
clarified.
Bylaw 88-17.
Perfect, okay. The Ontario Heritage Act that trumps any other act, and I know you may not have it at your fingertips, are there examples that you could provide sometime of court cases that have gone to that particular degree?
Not off the top of my head, but I might be able to dig up something for you, and I could send it to you.
And I didn't think you'd be able to, because that's a tough question to answer. But
It's clear in the Act, Section 68, subsection 3. It's clear on that issue. I mean, it states it specific.
68.3 of the Ontario Heritage Act?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it couldn't be more clear, in my opinion.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Mr. Halbert. Thanks, Kennedy. So we're going straight to questions of staff. I have Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. My question is going to focus around the financial implications. And when I read this, initially when this was deferred to this committee, it was my impression
sorry,
that...
Mr. Halbert, yes, thank you.
It was my impression that much of this work was something that was more just an update, can be done in-house. But after reading the report and seeing the breadth of work that's required, it's quite a bit of a setback. And so can you just explain the financial impact to the corporation of conducting this review?
Yes, through you, Chair Davey, if we follow the course of action outlined in the report, we are saying that there would not be any financial impact because these are all things that have been in our work program and in our business plan for several years. What it does do is that we would have to start working on some foundational points that would lead up to a change to the or to amendments or revisions to the Heritage Conservation District Plan. But by maintaining the sequence, there would be no impact on our resources.
Okay.
To throw that, or to change that sequencing.
So can you comment on page 4-5 and the different, some of the implications that could be? And at what point would that be necessary then? Like, for example, number 3, approximate 1.5 FTE for duration of the project. 4, hire consultant team at estimated cost of approximately $60,000. At what step would that be? Or if that?
Those are only if we deviate from the recommendation. If we approve the recommendation, but none of those are in place. Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to make sure, that the recommendation that staff is outlining is not requiring anything additional to what the additional financial implications could be if additional steps are taken. So there's nothing additional FTE requirement or consultant work that's required with the staff recommendation currently.
That is correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. That's what, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make sure that there's not going to be a future impact based on what the report is outlining right now.
Very good. Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of questions, but I'd like to, I noticed that there's a lot of other questions coming up, but I want to pass the recommendation with an amendment or an addition once the time is right. Mr. Pernard, there's one point on 4-2 that, and it's in the first bullet point at the very bottom. The city currently goes beyond the legislative requirements when dealing with the prospective or current owners of a heritage permit. The word beyond I have a little bit of concern with that, because in listening to what Mr. Halboom was telling us, the Ontario Heritage Act dominates over the Planning Act, which would indicate to me that if we are just following, or when it talks about going beyond, when we say beyond, are we going beyond what our Planning Act is stating, or are we going beyond what the Ontario Heritage Act is asking us to do with regard to legislative requirements and notification?
Yes, through you, Chair Davey, in this specific instance, we're saying the Ontario Heritage Act.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. The other question I had was trying to pose this question. So how much did we already spend on consultation for the Cultural Heritage Review? Can you give me an idea of what we've done there?
Through you, Chair Davey, that is something I prefer to follow up with offline, only because I don't have the exact number at my fingertips. And the report author, if he were here, would be able to answer that, but he's not available.
Okay, and I'm glad to see that we are moving forward and that we're looking at approval of that in 2015. I think that's the reason I asked the question was sort of in relation to Councillor Singh's questions and concern about the financial implications. I think we're doing a fair bit of due diligence with that cultural heritage landscape study that we're doing presently. I almost said Councillor Halboon, but Mrs. Halboon discussed about the GRCA and the flood proofing. And I mean, we've been through a process in my ward where a particular building was built using the lowest point of grade. And of course, that building was significantly higher once it was all measured out. So I think what Mrs. Halboon is indicating here is that once the grading is completed, that we're seeing some significant height. So is this a conversation that we should be having with GRCA?
Yes, through you, Chair Davey, we can have that conversation. In fact, if we follow up on the course of action outline, that would be part of our normal process when we're looking at a comprehensive review of an entire framework to deal with all the approval agencies that get involved. What I can say very quickly at this time is that if the Conservation Authority requires a minimum elevation to avoid flooding, we're unlikely to get a lot of action on that. However, what I also can add is that now that we understand that reality and the fact that we're looking at the sum of the entire framework, we would have the ability through the process to build in some countermeasures that would actually help maybe compensate for a higher minimum elevation, because it would result in slightly perched houses, which has in fact happened in that district.
Okay. I think that was flipping into the food truck item. I think that was the other questions I had. So with the direction in a discussion with GRCA, and I'm just going to defer to you as well, Chair Davey, I don't know that it's necessary then to include that into the recommendation if staff has already identified that they've heard what the delegations have said, and that will be included in the framework discussions.
Mr. Pierre is nodding yes.
Okay.
I
will.
If you are finished, actually, Councillor Fernandez, in the interest of time, if you wanted to bring forward your motion now, we could.
Okay. Well, my motion is actually to accept the recommendation as printed, with the addition of ensuring discussions with the residents of the Upper Dune Heritage Conservation District occur before we start detailed work on some of this. I think we may be able to avoid some additional work. So I was trying to frame that, and I was going to actually frame that into the recommendation after I heard the other questions from the rest of council.
Oh, yeah,
but that's where I'm going.
That's where you're going. Okay, so yeah, so work on that while we go through. I still have 4 people in the queue.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Councillor Etherington.
One very quick question. Do we currently have an Upper Dune representative on our Heritage Committee?
Through you, Chair Davey, my understanding is that it's vacant.
I'm sorry?
It's vacant.
It's vacant.
That's what I thought.
Okay. Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, through you, Chair Davey. The question I have is, it seems obvious that this is an important issue, and I'm just wondering why one of the deferral options was not inputting in the cultural heritage landscape study, because to me, that's one of the things I think the region's already been doing, and we're doing basically duplicate service, and it's one of those things I think it's as I hear often around this horseshoe, a nice to have. So I just wondering why that wasn't put in as an option to put that off on one of the priorities and move this priority first, because it's obvious to me this is rather more important.
Yeah. Through your chair, Davey, staff would not describe it as a nice to have, and in fact, we've also made the point previously in these chambers that the city initiated cultural heritage landscape study is actually being more specific than anything that would be done at the regional level, and would be Kitchener specific and context specific. It also is included as part of that supporting framework, the foundational pieces that actually help you focus your update on your Upper Dune Heritage Conservation District, and would put you in a stronger position to withstand an appeal. So we actually think it's part of the building blocks that are necessary to get to the final product.
Okay. Actually, I think you clicked out. I'm trying to put you back in. I didn't turn you off. Please continue.
So the other question is, and it's coming off Councillor Fernandez's possible amendment. How much extra time of staff would that occur?
Yeah. Through you again, Chair Davey, we haven't quantified that. I would like to follow up with Councillor Fernandez and get an understanding of what the expectation is. But having dialogue with our, community members is something that we do quite regularly. If it's maybe a focused event that would take up one day, it's something that we could manage. In addition to other things that are already outlined in the report. If it's much more than that, then we'd probably report back to council and put together some options in terms of what the trade-offs may be.
Okay, because I think that's somewhat important, because I did take a tour down there about 2 months ago, and I heard quite a few opposing views of what is being said today. So I haven't heard any of that being captured in any of these meetings. So I would like to see that all captured.
Okay.
Councillor Yaneski.
Just further to Councillor Fernandez's comments about moving the recommendation, maybe we can provide a clarification. And the representation from Upper Dune of maybe being two reps, were you adding that as a slight amendment, or what was happening on that? I didn't quite catch that in the end.
Councillor Fernandez, clarify.
No, I wasn't necessarily changing the representation. I was indicating that I wanted part of the recommendation that heritage staff sit down and speak with the members of SPUD and the residents to understand what's transpired and how to go forward.
Okay, because I'm just following up on what Jean Halbom had mentioned about there's 2 reps according to what they've had adopted by bylaw back 30 years ago, and I think there's only 1 on the committee. So I'm just wondering whether it should be clarified or corrected to have the 2.
That's the motion that's brought forward is 1, I believe.
I'm certainly willing to add that to my recommendation,
Okay.
but I see Mr. Pinard is...
Oh, sorry, Mr. Pinard.
Yeah. So, Chair Davey, because this is a new item, I would suggest it'd be appropriate to actually have staff report on that specific item. It is an actual procedural bylaw that actually outlines the representation on the committees, and obviously there was a review that was done to determine that, which is information that we don't have available to us today. What I can say is that when Upper Dune came forward, it was our only heritage conservation district. We now have others in the city and others that actually have many more properties that only have 1. So I think that's part of the context that would be beneficial for committee and council to have before making a decision on that one specific item.
Thank you.
Okay, appreciate that. My other question to Mr. Pinard is that the approach to maybe addressing the concerns of the Upper Dune, reviewing this whole package, may be appropriate by using the zoning bylaw in terms of maybe making something specific. And I know that the comprehensive review of the zoning bylaw is taking place. When do you anticipate that maybe to be coming forward and to council as the whole package, and then this being included in that? Is that workable?
Through you, Chair Davey, I don't actually have a hard date for you that I could give you today. I can say that the zoning bylaw as a whole is going to be rolled out over the next 2 years, and it's going to come forward in different components. We are actually going to have 6 statutory public meetings this year to deal with the zoning bylaw, and we would actually and we will have more in the subsequent year. The more context-specific ones are more likely to occur in 2016. So 2016 is where we're intending at this point in time to come forward with the more context-specific zone changes, which in this case would be informed and reinforced by the implementation actions on the Cultural Heritage Landscape Study and the update to the Urban Design Manual, which will include infill guidelines and infill guidelines that will also have some context-specific guidelines, including the heritage conservation districts.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before you go back, Councillor Gazzola.
I want to make a comment. I don't have any questions of staff.
Not just yet, if that's okay. Thank you. Okay, just looking at the queue. I just have 2 questions. The first question is not including the portion, Councillor Fernandez amendments. So in other words, if we were just to approve the original recommendation, would this impact staff outside of heritage planning staff?
Through you, Chair Davey, yes, it would. Most of our project-based work involves teamwork. A lot of the heritage projects are led by the heritage planners, but it does require the support of other staff that have specializations, like our urban design staff, our environmental staff, and so on. So the answer is yes. Also, the more engagement that is involved with the community could involve other divisions, support divisions such as communications, and of course, the manager and possibly the director might get involved as well.
Okay. Looking at the first recommendation, I just want to make sure, because I'm not completely familiar with the process, so I want to be, and that's my concern, is the process. I'm not sure how to ask the question, but I guess my concern is if the ward councillor has a stricter interpretation, let's say, of heritage rules than, and this is supposing, than council or the heritage committee themselves. I'm afraid that would unduly dissuade, for example, anyone that has a permit. So I guess the response I'm looking in having that meeting. So the response I'm looking from you, Mr. Pignard, is either yes, that's a risk, or no, it's not, and this is why.
Okay. To you, Chair Davey, I don't think there's a risk if at the end of the day there is a professional recommendation that goes to both the committee and then eventually to council, because there could be an opinion from either a ward council or a member of the community as to what legislation prevails over what legislation. But at the end of the day, the staff individual who is writing the report will get some information from our legal services staff, and will also conduct his or her own research, and would include that as part of the analysis, and that would, of course, inform the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. So, to Councillor Fernandez to clarify the motion and then comment.
Yeah. So essentially, it's that that heritage staff engage in conversation with the members of SPUD / the Upper Dune Heritage District's residents to understand the work that has been done understand the work that has been done to the bylaw as it was created, and then the clear definitions that Jean Halbam indicated, that they understand the definitions as it was written in the bylaw. And I think it might be helpful for staff, and I'm not talking about hours and hours and hours of meeting. I think just a good couple of hours session together, our staff understands what was happening in the 1980s, what the definitions were, and what they were understood by heritage staff then and by the residents then, and how that would move forward. So that's really the only addition I'm adding, is that the heritage staff engage in conversations with the members of Spud/Upper Dune Heritage District to understand the work that was done with the bylaw and the definitions as they were understood at that time.
Okay.
And do you want
I
comments?
think on that for a
or?
second. Yes. Yeah, actually, comment, please.
It's a long-winded comment, so I'm going to need my full 5 minutes.
Sure.
You know, I've had meetings with both staff and the residents a number of times to ensure that we get to the right place for this, and I do appreciate the 3 recommendations that staff have put forward. I support them, and I think that it's important for us to make sure that we preserve one of the first heritage districts that we set aside. That was the framework from which all other heritage districts bylaws were created. And I think that it's respectful of the time that those residents took, the fact that they went to the OMB, that it was upheld at the OMB, that we continue to do the same. If there is some point of clarification, or if there's an opportunity for us to understand better how all of this came about, because we've had changes in staff, we've had changes in council. So it's critical for us to preserve, and we want to stand behind saying that we want to preserve the integrity and the heritage of our city, then we have to make sure that we're very clear, that we don't dilute what's been happening and what's starting to happen. I'm seeing it happen there. We don't want to dilute that Upper Heritage Conservation District, and we have to be very clear on what is happening. As we heard from both Jean Hellboom and Richard Hellboom, there are parts of the Ontario Heritage Act that supersede the Planning Act, and I think it's pretty clear that is something that has either been not paid attention to as it should have been. And if we take a look at that act, and I'm sure our staff are very familiar with it, then we need to follow those guidelines as well. Words like mass, design, size, height, all of those are words that clearly the people who worked on that plan understood. But it seems that there is less understanding as applications come forward within that Upper Dune Heritage District. And so we have to make sure that we're very clear on what that means. Comments about whether it's nice to have and that we're duplicating regions' efforts. When this was presented to Council about doing the Cultural Heritage Landscape Study, there were no objections at the time. There was no discussion about whether it was a duplication because it's different. The region was looking at a broader view, and staff indicated to Council at the time that this was drilling down and more specific to heritage districts and heritage cultural landscapes within our own city. So I'm sincerely hoping that Council will support the recommendations. I think it's good work. It's a good opportunity. It's a good course of action, and I think it's respectful of staff's time. We're not taking additional time because it's working within the framework and within the direction and course of action that staff is already taking. And that's my comment. I see we have a whole list of comments coming up.
Yes, I have 6 people in the queue. We are now 20-ish minutes overdue. So I would ask committee to please keep your comments brief. There are many delegations here. We have 6 delegations for the next item, the food truck item, so please please respect their time as well as we go through this. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, before I get into my comments, I just want to deal with this question of members on the committee. We're short a few members on the committee, and I understand there have been a number of people have applied. I'd like to know when this council is going to deal with that, and if we can deal with it as quickly as possible, so as to have these people on the committee for the next meeting, which is, I think, February the 3rd.
Ms. Tarling?
Yes, the appointments for Heritage Kitchener's coming forward next Monday at Special Council.
And there was a bit of a mix-up on one of the appointments that I thought was appointed, but we'll deal with that at that time, okay? That's fine. Getting to the motion that's before us, I will, after hearing from the delegation and from the ward councillor in this specific ward, I'm totally in support of the recommendation before us, and I think it's also important to keep in mind the sort of minor but powerful additional considerations put forward by the delegate. I think we really have to consider several of those items that were brought up. The grading can cause us problems in that neighborhood. The other issue of the quick consideration given to people that want to tear the buildings down. We have to look at that much more closely in the future. During the recent election campaign, everybody talked about the importance of neighborhoods and how this was one of the main objectives of our new term here. Well, we have there a neighborhood that's a strong neighborhood, has been a very strong neighborhood, and we need to do everything we can to preserve it the way it was set up as a conservation district. And the neighborhood is a strong neighborhood, and they need our support, though, to make sure that we move forward on these things. So I really urge council to support the recommendations with the minor adjustments that are before us today. Thank you.
Councillor Singh?
Yes, sorry, quick question to Councillor Fernandez. So, part of your amendment, are you still proposing that there be 2 members from the... okay, so you've taken that. I was concerned with that suggestion to begin with. So I'll make my comments brief. I'm comfortable with supporting the recommendation that's before us through staff, that this is just a necessary review that should be done. Though I'm not comfortable with some of the additional changes that Councillor Fernandez has made, especially giving direction to staff that they understand what the intentions of the previous committee or staff was when this conservation was initially put in place. I think staff are well versed in good practices and with the current legislation what needs to be done to advise them to know what they should be doing. It's almost insulting in the way I took that suggestion. So I can't support that. But I will support the recommendation that's before us, and that's it.
So we'll vote on that piece separately then. Going through, Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Actually, I'm going to piggyback on Councillor Singh. The amendment is kind of where I have my concern. I have no problem with directing staff to meet with residents. That's fine. But I'd like to see that part of the recommendation or that amendment be a period. That's have meeting with residents, and then they can prescribe what the outcome of that meeting is. I think we're trying to force a dialogue that is likely going to happen regardless, but I don't think we need to prescribe that through the amendment. So I'd rather just have that amendment say that you have a meeting with residents, and I'm sure, I'm positive the Halbooms will be there and make sure that the points that they've brought forward, not only here, but will be brought forward in that meeting as well. And then I just wanted to add that we can't lose sight of the fact that we need to do this work, and I'm not disagreeing. I am going to support staff recommendation, but we can't lose sight of the fact that it has risk to it too, because any changes that happen to this through the work will be appealable. And I think we just have to, as we proceed with that, keep that in the back of our mind, that it can be appealed, and that the changes that we make are compatible for the community, are what the residents want, but also that we don't see ourselves in a long battle over changes that potentially could come out of this plan.
Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, through you, Chair Davey. I can support the recommendation. I'm not very comfortable with the additional amendment, and I think, this is an item that to me seems rather important, and I've heard about, it was part of an election campaigns that, strong neighborhoods, and I agree it should be part of strong neighborhoods, but we also heard about election campaigns that said creating efficiency and not having duplication. And, I see there's a perfect example here in the Cultridge Heritage Study here that's to me is rather duplication. The region's already doing that, and it's no offense to land. I think those resources could be done to look after this matter, which is to me rather important, and I think that's where we need to focus our efforts on.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh?
It's okay. Take me out of the queue. Thanks.
Councillor Yaneski?
Yes, thank you. I'm prepared to support this recommendation in its entirety. I go back to the days of when Upper Dune was created, and had participated to a certain degree in terms of the planning input at that time from my role then. As a member of Councillor on Heritage Committee, I think it's quite important that we review this, and I think it's a good step forward to address the issues that have just unfolded back over the last few months on this. And I think strong neighborhoods has been mentioned, and of course this is a community that stands out because it was one of the first to be the strong communities going back many decades ago. So, and it continues on, and there's sort of been a little bit of hiccup along the way right now, and I think it needs to be addressed. So I'm prepared to support this, and we should be moving forward on this.
Mayor Verbenovich?
Thank you very much. I'll be supporting the recommendation in its current form. I'm certainly encouraged by all the language I'm hearing about strong neighborhoods. It gives me, I guess, cause for hope in a number of the other issues we'll be dealing with in the months ahead as they relate to strengthening our neighborhoods throughout the city. I think specifically with respect to some of the addition that's been added on, and whether it's included in the motion or not. I mean, the direction to staff to meet with residents, I think could happen without that. But I think the other part does cause me some concern, as it does for several of my other colleagues on council. I think it does start suggesting in an indirect way that perhaps heritage staff either aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing or aren't familiar with things the way they should be, and I don't think that's the case. So I couldn't support those aspects of the amendments.
Thank you. And Councillor Fernandez, final quick word, please.
I'm trying to word this politically correct without losing my cool. The reason I was very clear about my amendment was because I didn't want to have any misunderstanding about what I meant. I'm not disrespecting staff. What I'm trying to do is make sure that it's very clear what transpired and what needs to be defined. I think there are often times when staff gets very mired in all of the work that they have to do. We talked about that earlier this morning with the business plan. With the help of engaged citizens who understand what transpired in the 1980s, have clear understanding what the Ontario Heritage Act says, why would we not be thrilled to have that? And if I happen to include it in my motion, it's no disrespect to staff. It's only supporting staff in the work that they are going to be doing. So I take very serious umbrage to the fact that the usual suspects are criticizing me for being very clear with my emotion. I know very clearly how this is going to come out, but I think that staff has heard how important it is that conversations happen. So I'm going to leave the motion that I have put forward as number 4 with the slight change that would exclude to understand the work that has been done up to the clear definitions. So we'll just say that heritage staff engage in conversations with the members of SPUD and the Upper Dune Heritage District residents. And let's hope that that will pass. Efficiencies can be gained by this because things get discussed, conversations are had, clear understanding happens. We're not duplicating the efforts at all, and we're not being disrespectful of staff.
And that also includes no specificity in how those conversations take place, just to be clear. Okay. Okay, I will support the recommendation and the amended clause. Councillor Galloway-Seelock?
And I just want to go around again. I just want to say that I think it was just some of your wording, and that may have been because you were doing it on the fly. I had no problem in thinking that it was disrespect to staff. I want to make that clear. I just think that giving that direction to meet with them, I think, is sufficient to get done what you want accomplished.
Recorded vote. So we will take items 1 to 3 first. Item number 4 is Councillor Fernandez's request of staff that heritage staff engage in conversations with SPUD and the Upper Dune Heritage. It's because I chose 3 other ones first. Okay, so yeah, items 1 to 3 we're voting on. Okay, those in favor? Just for the stand, it's unanimous. And we'll now vote on the 4th clause as added by Councillor Fernandez. Voting is open. Those in favor? And opposed? That carries as well. Okay, we will move on to the food truck item. Thank you for your patience. Ms. Harris will introduce the item.
I will just give you a brief overview of the report that is before you today. On May 12, 2014, Council passed Bylaw 2014-56, which regulated food trucks. At the time, Council requested staff review the bylaw early in 2015 and recommend changes to the bylaw if necessary. This report provides Council with a follow-up assessment of the 2014 experience and summarizes the stakeholder consultations completed to date. The report also outlines possible amendments to the bylaw to balance and respond to stakeholder feedback. Stakeholder consultations included licensed food truck operators, downtown businesses, the Downtown Kitchener BIA, the Belmont BIA, and the general public. Consultation was done through surveys, email, and social media. In order to ensure that the consultation was comprehensive, staff provided Council with an update in December, at which time 2 additional suggestions were made by councillors. These were incorporated into the consultation plan. The report provides the various positions of the food truck operators, downtown businesses, Belmont businesses, and the general public. In general, there appears to be community support for food trucks, although this support is clearly not universal. This finding has motivated staff to continue to relax the provisions related to food trucks in a measured way. The recommendations before Council will increase opportunities for food trucks in 2015 through reduced limiting distances and possible increased programming opportunities in Carl's Air Square, among other things. The report also recommends that parking lots, the downtown core, and Bright Up Street be explored as additional approved food truck locations. Staff recommend that these last suggestions be deferred to allow for more detailed discussions with downtown businesses and Bright Up Street residents who may perceive an impact by the increased presence of food trucks in their area. It is recommended that the immediate recommendations before Council be approved today, as the current bylaw expires February 28, 2015, and needs to be replaced. Subject to the outcome of discussions between the Downtown Kitchener BIA and food truck operators and transportation planning staff and Bright Up Street residents, amending bylaws can be brought forward at a later date to add any locational changes after further discussion has transpired. If Council has any questions regarding the Downtown Kitchener BIA's interest in expediting these discussions, a representative of the DKBIA is here today to answer those questions.
Okay, very good. So we do have 6 delegations. My understanding is there is at least some decent consensus among the community, so I would ask that you make your comments appropriately. First, I do have Ms. Yetzi from the Downtown BIA. Are you just here to respond to questions, or did you wish to make presentation as well? Oh, pardon me. Yes, please. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Davey, and good morning, members of Council. I just wanted to, I will be very brief and very direct in a couple of comments, and I'm going to put them in 2 buckets for you. The first bucket is about the positive attributes of the restaurants of downtown Kitchener, what's working, and the second bucket I would just address the risks to the downtown businesses, and then I'll wrap that up. So in my first bucket, I think that we just have to recognize that we're very fortunate downtown Kitchener to have an eclectic group of restaurants. We have different cultures being represented. You can have everything from pizza to burgers and fries to a higher-end culinary experience. We're really fortunate to have that. We're also really fortunate downtown Kitchener that the restaurants all work really well together. I'm really encouraged as the executive director of the BIA to see that when we come up with a marketing plan, they do work together really well to help each other out. This was really evident last fall when I watched over a dozen chefs representing 10 different restaurants put together a beautiful dinner at the Kitchener Market, and they worked well together. And I think another really positive attribute is that they are very open to the integration of food trucks. They do realize that there's a solution, that right solution can be resolved. They are not closed-minded to having food trucks come into the core. So now I'll speak to the other bucket, which is just that today we're in a transition. The downtown core is being revitalized. And to get to a strong community and a strong neighborhood downtown, it's going to take some time. We're facing some challenges. We're going to have some more construction happening through the LRT. And the restaurants today share what I would call limited foot traffic. It's not fully revitalized today. It's coming, and we're all really positive about what's coming. But that is like a pie, and they're all sharing a piece of that pie. And the restaurants downtown are primarily sole proprietorships that have invested personally in the downtown core. And I think we want to see them not just thrive, we want to see them thrive, but first they have to survive. So in these transitional years of what we're about to go through, I would just ask that we take careful consideration in introducing any new risks to them. And opening the floodgates of unlimited food truck operators just means that there is an increased impact to their business and to the pie that they all have to share. So in closing, yes, they're very open to discussing a solution. They work well together. I think that they're working very, very hard to be successful. And I'd like to reduce the impact they have with risks. So thank you, Mr. Chair and members of Council.
Thank you, Ms. Yetzi. Questions of the delegation? I have Councillor Ioannidis.
Sorry, my question was for staff.
For staff, okay. Any questions of the delegation? Okay, I didn't hear, I just have a single question. I didn't hear, like, I'm receptive to your message, but I didn't hear any specific concerns with the report as it is. Could you comment on?
I can come through you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the report, the restaurants are not, again, understanding that there is a solution and that we are opening up food truck operators on different days to be in the Civic Square and in different locations. There were no concerns about that.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to our next delegation, Mr. Schmuck, Brad Schmuck. Just a reminder to all delegates as well, you have a maximum of 5 minutes to make your presentation, okay?
Morning, councillors.
Morning.
So I'm glad we're back discussing the food truck issue. I'm glad it's January when we're discussing it. So, I appreciate you guys taking the time this early in the season for us. A couple of my issues are, there's all this talk about the BIA and downtowns and all this stuff, and we've come to terms with reducing the amount of space between property lines down to 10 meters. So, there is some compromise. I like the way the plan's going right now, but there's some areas I think that we can improve on to help create a sustainable business for food trucks in Kitchener. And not necessarily the downtown BIA area, but more the business parks and the business areas. And, some of the places that don't have the restaurants nearby or don't have those types of services nearby. So in my understanding with the current bylaw and the way it's written is we're only allowed to operate on properties that are zoned for restaurants. And what I am proposing is that we are allowed to operate on any property that is zoned either industrial or commercial or whatnot. We can leave the residential out of it. I understand that part of it. But I think to make a sustainable business for us as food truck operators, the places that we need to go are where the people are for lunch. And with all this pressure in the BIA and continuing talks and the restaurants don't want us and this and that, I think if we find some other sustainable areas for us to operate in, then we can kind of move forward with the other areas that we need to continue to work on a daily basis. But we, as food truck operators, need daily access where people are, such as the Riverbend area. Here on Business Park was a good one last year. But there's multiple other smaller business park areas within the city that I think we can operate on. But because of the way the current bylaw is written, that we're not allowed to operate on those properties. Even though last year I would get phone calls from people saying, can you come, serve my employees or, employees, and I'd ask what the zoning of the property is. And of course it wasn't zoned restaurants, so I couldn't go and sell to the public. Even though they want to provide that food for their staff, I kind of lose that opportunity to get out there and service those people that actually want our product. So, that's kind of where I'm coming from today. We really want to create a sustainable business platform for us in Kitchener. We need to move forward with it. We need to have those spots where we can go on a daily basis. So that's basically the way I look at it is, we are a startup business for someone who's aspiring to be a restaurant owner or aspiring to be, a catering company. So I think if we have the platform to, create that business, I think we can be very successful in Kitchener because there's lots of areas that we can, generate an income from. But right now it's really tough to operate in this city and make a viable income out of it. So that's just basically where I'm coming from today.
Thank you very much. There are several questions. First, Councillor Inez.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Davey, and thanks, Mr. Schmuck, for coming in and giving us your opinion. So overall, you're pretty pleased with the direction that staff's report is going?
Yeah, I think it looks better. There's some changes, some positive changes, I think, and just working with the BIA to kind of create a better, downtown atmosphere, I think we can actually draw some people down here to help out the businesses that might not be successful, and maybe those people don't know that there's businesses down here that restaurants down here that they can eat at. So,
okay. And your one major concern is about the business park areas in particular. I could have swore I thought that was already was in our last year's agreement. So I'm a little
just Huron Business Park
is just the Huron Business Park.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so you want to further open it up to other business parks. Okay.
Yes. Business properties.
Business
so to
properties.
speak. Yeah.
But I don't think that will address your concern about the zoning, because I think that was tied to zoning in the Huron Business Park. But I may be wrong, but I'm going to ask those questions to staff.
Yeah, I need some clarifications on that too.
But I just want to put the chair on notice that I would like to put maybe an amendment towards that in that specifics, unless that's already addressed.
Noted.
When it's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Vabenovich?
Thanks. So just on that industrial commercial property end of things, Mr. Schmuck, have you had conversations with staff about that?
I haven't personally, no. It's just something that in the last couple of weeks I've thought of, after we got the report and seen what the recommendations were from staff. So I think moving forward, that's something we can discuss.
Okay. So, but you know for a fact that you're not allowed right now?
Well, it says as long as the zoning requires it, and as far as I'm concerned, that map that we got last year had certain areas that we were allowed to operate in, but they were all zoned restaurant. So if it's not zoned restaurant, then we can't operate. That's the understanding that I'm at.
Okay, so that's maybe something that we can get some clarification on, as Councillor Ioannidis indicated. That would be it for my questions right now. Thank you.
Councillor Yaneski?
Yeah, my question is almost identical to the comments. And you said you got a map last year from planning staff, or is it from clerk staff because there is a lot of zones that do allow restaurants. It's a matter of getting all that information and plotting it, or having it plotted on a map, so this way you can identify which areas you need to go to, and that helps you. I got the impression that you didn't quite get all the information.
As far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, the map that we got last year only had zoning for restaurants. So there's a lot of industrial areas that we could also benefit from, I think, too, that aren't allowed to operate on as a food business. So those are the types of zoning that I think we should be allowed to operate on.
Okay. I would just suggest maybe to clarify with planning staff and get the overall map with where all the restaurants included. And maybe some industrial zones don't have it, but other industrial zones do have, and business parks do. So it's a matter of getting all that correct information, and I think that will help you quite a bit. It may not be perfect, but it'll be a good start.
Yeah.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah,
It's along the same lines. I was just curious if you could give me some examples of where you would have liked to have gone and you can't. Is it possible off the top of your head to give me 3 or 4 examples?
Well, Riverbend, I've done a number of caterings out there, so and they've asked me if I can come and park on the property. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that's one of the areas that we're allowed to operate in. So I know that was a big one for me last year. And then out behind the Bud area there, I don't know what that business park is, but a lot of those properties are zoned industrial, so we can't operate out of there. So it's just giving us more avenues to test to see if the market actually in those areas there's a demand for food trucks, because those people don't have to get in their cars and drive somewhere. They can actually just walk to where we are. So that's kind of what we're trying to create.
Actually, the next thing is probably a question for staff, but maybe you can tell me if a property owner allows you to park there, that doesn't necessarily mean you can do so, right? You have to get the approval.
Yes. It has to be zoned properly.
Thank
so
you.
Even though we'd have the permission from the property owner, we still can't park there. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Marsh?
Thank you, Mr. Schmuck, for coming in and for your presentation. I'm encouraged to hear that you are generally in support of the changes to the bylaw. Mm-hmm. So I think I would need to just understand, what prevented you, from being able to operate in, for example, the Bud Park area? It seems to be that is one of the areas in the current bylaw. I wonder if maybe the bylaw was, perhaps unclear, but it looks like it in my papers, it looks like it is included in the allowed.
But Bud Park is the actual park itself, but I'm talking about the business park behind Bud Park.
I'll just get, this seems to be a common trend, so I'll just jump to staff for one quick moment. I seem to recall here on Business Park being the pilot place too, but it does say in our document on page 5.5 that currently all business parks are open to food trucks provided they meet zoning requirements and have permission from the property owner. So can we get some clarification on that? Ms. Harris.
That's correct. All business parks are open provided the zoning allows for food trucks. We could take it back and get clarification from our zoning department to determine exactly which business parks allow them, or if there's a different interpretation that they can make for food trucks.
Okay, so we'll ask committee to hold that thought until we get to further questions of staff. Ms. Marsh, did you have further questions?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Mr. Schmuck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pardon me. The next delegation is Mr. Chris Corrigan.
Morning, Mr. Chair.
Morning.
Councillors, Mayor. Thank you for inviting us for this. I think I can jump right to maybe a little bit of clarification on that last point. So I do have the bylaw in front of me here, and it is section 20 and 21 that there's a little bit of ambiguity in, and we'd like some clarification on that. So if you look through section 21, it does, subpara A, does specifically it excludes us from operating in areas where the zoning is very specific. So I think there's just some clarification that's required there. However, moving forward, we met as a group last week, and some of our comments and conclusions were that we're very much in favor of the changes and amendments to the bylaw as it stands now. We're very impressed with the work that staff has done and the support that they've shown us for moving forward as an industry. As you know, or as you may know, my business is not mainly food truck, but we have a little place down on Lancaster Street West that is a full-service restaurant. The food truck business sort of grew as an opportunity to service our catering and special event business, which is a little bit opposite to the way that most of my colleagues in the food truck business are working, in that they are out there as entrepreneurs trying to build a business that, in fact, may eventually grow into a bricks and mortar business. And the one thing that we are disadvantaged to in Canada is that there's no real empirical data or opinions or reports written for the industry. But in 2012, there was a report from the National League of Cities that was done, and I'd just like to read you the one paragraph out of the executive summary because I think it frames what we're trying to accomplish and the impact that food trucks are going to have moving forward. So mobile food vending in the U.S. Generates approximately $650 million in annual revenue. The industry is projected to account for approximately $2.7 billion in food revenue over the next 5 years, but unfortunately, most cities are legally ill-equipped to harness this expansion. Many city ordinances were written decades ago with a different type of mobile food service supplier in mind, like ice cream trucks, hot dog carts, sidewalk peddlers, and similar operations. Modern mobile vending is a substantial departure from the vending typically assumed in outdated local regulations. Vendors utilize large vehicles packed with high-tech cooking equipment and sanitation devices to provide sophisticated, safe food, usually prepared to order. So I think that frames where we're coming from in terms of an industry and the impact. And certainly I recognize that with a bricks and mortar establishment and my fellow bricks and mortar establishments in the downtown core, although we're not in the downtown business area, would have issues with a rampant free-range run of food trucks all around. I think what we're asking for are some very specific changes and clarifications to the bylaw that are going to allow future growth in conjunction with the vision that the city has for the downtown core. So I'm going to move specifically to one agenda item on the report that we'd like to see some changes in, and that's access to Carl's Air Square. So it has been recommended by staff to keep the program moving forward there, but we're looking for more of a 5-day to 7-day-a-week opportunity through the lunch hour there. I think that we could support what is happening. I think we can support culture. I think that we can support the drive to increase people coming into the core. And when the Business Association talks about so much of a pie, we're looking at increasing the pie. We want to drive more business to the downtown core by bringing people in for not just our events or for the lunch hour events, but in general. Thank you very much for your time, and appreciate your attention.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Yaneski?
Yeah, based on your last comment on spending more time in the core in the Civic Square, is that your objective to be there like all day, or just a lunch hour thing, or just an evening thing, or what are you looking at?
Specifically as a group, we looked from the hours of 11 till 2.
Okay, so it's just a lunch hour.
Lunch hour crowd in Carl's Air Square.
And what about weekends? Is that a Monday to Friday thing you're looking at? Or
in a perfect world, Councillor, we would love 7 days a week, but we recognize that it's a walk before you can run type of situation. So, and we were talking about a couple of trucks as well too. And again, further to that, while we don't want to burden city staff, anymore, we would be willing to work with them in terms of scheduling those. So, however that might work, whether it's a lottery system or a schedule according to the operators. We would look to staff to help us with that.
So you mentioned 2 trucks. You're talking like 2 trucks per day?
2 trucks per day.
And then each day would be a different variety of
It could very well be.
trucks?
It might be the same truck for 3 days in a row, depending on the truck schedule and how we might resolve this.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Rabinovich?
Thanks. Thanks for coming in. Quick question for you on the square access. You talk only about being there during the lunch hour, and I would venture to say that some of the existing businesses would argue that you only want the lucrative times, the most lucrative times, which really they need for their survival. If we were going to consider additional square access, would you and or other food truck operators be amenable to requiring yourselves to be there the full day? So in other words, you have to be there both for the slower times and the busier times.
I think that would be very doable.
Okay, thank you.
I think under discussion with that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gazzola? Oh, pardon me. There you go.
Actually, I think I was wondering the numbers, and you've really answered that. Is that if you have 2 vehicles there, would they be right on the square or on the street?
I'm not 100% of the answer to that question, Councillor. That would really depend on what the regulations are and where that would be placed. I'm not sure what the experience has been with the other trucks, so that would really be up to staff to guide us.
Okay. Has anybody talked to staff about that possibility? Has that been...
We hadn't gotten back to staff because we only got the report at the beginning of January, and we just had a meeting last week among the operators ourselves, so it's really been a timing issue.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Etherington?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming in. There always seems to be a dichotomy here between when you say that you add to the vitality of the downtown, would you also agree that if you're in, say, Carl's Air Square at lunchtimes, you add to the burden faced by existing brick-and-mortar restaurants and would help push some more of them, out of business?
My personal belief is I don't believe so. Experience has shown in other cities throughout North America that quite the opposite is true. Again, if I'm planning, I think of it from a personal standpoint. If I'm planning to have a lunch and I'm planning to meet people, I'm going to go to a bricks and mortar establishment regardless of what food trucks are there. If I'm on the fly and I need a quick lunch somewhere or want to participate in that, a lot of those decisions, certainly in my mind, aren't made with a lot of foresight, but knowing that the trucks are there in a fallback position may be a good way to generate some more business and some more activity and just more foot traffic right around the square.
But we have, I'm thinking of at least 3 on-the-fly restaurants meeting that need at this end of town, close to City Hall Square. So what do you think of that? Like you would be competing with those businesses.
The answer to, I mean, I can't statistically give you any definitive answer. I can only speak from personal experience. Yeah. You know, I've been in the restaurant business in Kitchener-Waterloo now for 7 years. I have seen a multiple number of restaurants come and go. My answer to that, Councillor, is if you run a bad business, you run a bad business whether you're going to survive or not survive. If you run a great business and a good business, you're going to be there, you're going to do the right things that are going to attract customers to your location. And I think that there would, I'm really advocating some open-ended look at this, and hopefully that you know, we can try it, test it, and if we find that it doesn't work, then I'm wrong.
Recently, I've eaten in very good, established restaurants that are now no longer in business. So that doesn't meet what you're just describing to me.
Well, I think it meets it perfectly, sir. I think
getting a little argumentative here. Is there a quick question?
Yeah.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Ennis? No? Okay. Very good. Thank you for coming in. Mr.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, up next, we have Nadia Dragusano.
Good day, Chair, Councillors.
Hello.
I'm here on behalf of a few of my colleagues in the food truck business. I operate a food truck as well. I wanted to point out and say a thank you for staff. The report is definitely going in the right direction, totally different from when we met last year, so thank you for that. Just wanted to point out some specifics in the report that I think, or we think, could be revised or discussed further. So on the very first page, there's information on surface parking and exploring other opportunities. Our season is very short. It's about six months long. So we would like to see some timelines on when these opportunities would be explored. The other item here I'm looking at is the distance of separation. We acknowledge that it's been reduced to 10 meters. When you look at 10 meters property line to property line, if you take, for example, the Sunrise Plaza, it means a vast amount of space where we potentially would not even be able to operate. So we would like to ask for, similar to the City of Waterloo, distance of separation that is door to door. We heard comments on it's difficult to measure door to door versus property line based on systems, but we think that if another city can, the City of Kitchener should be able to. And the other item here I would just like to focus on is where the report states if there is an opportunity, if there is an interest among food truck operators to have greater opportunity to operate within the BIA boundaries, staff encourages food trucks and BIAs to engage in discussion. What we think should be a point of concern is, as opposed to looking at bringing in, or the city facilitating discussions on opportunity, having the city facilitate discussions on bringing the BIA and food truck operators together to discuss how we could work together to make downtown Kitchener a more lively place. And we've heard it from feedback, public feedback, as well as feedback from the BIA. There is that interest. They do want us. All the votes on Twitter were in favor of food trucks. And they've all said they would like to see more of it downtown. But still, we're hearing hesitation based on further discussion. So those are the points I would like to bring forward today. And thank you.
Thank you. There are questions, at least one. Councillor Yaneski?
Yeah, just on your last comment, which I found very interesting. So do I understand that none of the food truck operators have met with the downtown BIA to have discussions to see what everybody wants and needs and then try to work out some type of reasonable compromise?
Last year, we met with a couple of BIA members. I'm not sure if they were acting on behalf of the BIA or on behalf of their own business, but basically, the feedback we got was clear in that, I'm not sure how to word this properly, but the interest from the restaurants to support us working together wasn't as strong as we would like to have seen it. So we did have some discussion to answer your question, but it was more so about whether or not we would be allowed in the downtown area versus how we can work together to operate our business in the downtown area and draw people into this area.
Okay, which is why you're here to work through council to try to come to some type of reasonable compromise.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock?
Yeah, just a quick question, Nadia. With regards to that facilitated meeting that you're talking about, is that something that you would be okay with if we gave that direction to staff over the course of, the next year, that, it could be brought into, any changes from that could be brought in or amendments made into the bylaw at a later date? Is that how you kind of see that working?
Definitely, we do understand that there is discussion, so planning now for this season might be a stretch, but talking about bringing us together, at least having that on the table to say, yes, we will facilitate restaurants and food trucks opening discussion for next 2016 season is something we can consider.
Okay, thank you.
There are no further questions. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Next, we have Rick Duffy. Rick Duffy? Okay, Mr. Duffy is not here. And last, we have Ruben Salonga.
Chairman Davey.
Afternoon.
Councillors. Thank you for having me here. My name is Ruben Salonga, and I am the co-owner of Luchador Gourmet Streetery. I'm also a governance coordinator for the Ontario Food Trucks Association. Councillors, I look back 12 months ago when it was very different than what we have today. I recall our regional food truck movement was struggling towards sustainability. We had prevailing misconceptions about our industry, a lack of local food truck sites and events. We had disagreements with city staff reporting, and we had a little dialogue with the KDBIA. However, thanks to some of our champions in City Council, community advocates, and stewardship from our industry, people like Cafe du Monde, Schmuck Truck, Great British Bake, West of Seoul, we're now here today, and it is very different. And although there's some big statements being made about some of the changes that are necessary, I think we should take pause and take note that the food truck report proposed by or prepared by Patricia Harris was a fantastic report. It was very thorough, and it said volumes. For the first time, we had representation, and we heard, finally, from the KDBIA. We had overwhelming support for food trucks in our community. Support in the percentile that would rival and exceed the kind of support we had for our councillors being voted into their current position. Rather than waiting to try and get 100% votes in favor of food trucks, I think our mandate is clear. The people of Kitchener really do want to see food trucks more in our community. And that doesn't undermine the efforts we would like to make to work with our friends within the KDBIA. I'd like to thank this council. I'd like to thank community advocates like Sandra Bender. I'd like to thank people like James Howe. I'd like to thank the KDBIA, again, for finally sharing with us how they truly feel about food trucks. When I work outside of Kitchener, because I have a license to operate in other regions, people are looking at Kitchener as market leaders now. We weren't there last year. So there should be congratulations here, because there are communities in Guelph, in London, in Milton, in Burlington looking at us here and saying that stakeholders can get together, that this doesn't have to be this great long process moving forward, but a process indeed, and we're committed. I remember standing here asking that you trust food trucks to contribute to a city's ecosystem in a responsible manner. I'm here to you today to say that we could still do that moving forward. We have honest merchants who are sole proprietors. Our friends from brick and mortar, well, we share the same pedigree. Many of us, like Chris, come from brick and mortar. Their concerns, their aspirations are the same. Their trials, their fears, the same as ours. It's tough. 2014, there was more rain than there was shine. But today I could tell you I'm more optimistic about the year ahead of us. Kitchener is at the forefront of the food truck movement. We're here. We're doing something that Toronto couldn't do. Their councillors couldn't do this. Our champions can. I'd like to thank you guys. And moving forward, we're very enthusiastic about sharing, speaking, and continuing the discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Salonga. There are two questions. First, Councillor Yaneski.
Yes, thank you for coming in, and appreciate your comments, specifically the comment that provided a sort of a compliment to us as being the leaders in the industry, or being looked at as the leaders from other municipalities. But that raises a curiosity to me as to what challenges and difficulties other municipalities are doing that we are maybe doing better, and I'm just trying to understand what we are doing right versus what maybe others aren't doing right to make it workable for you guys.
Through the chair, to answer the councillor, a lot of it has to do with just the fear and the misconceptions of our industry. Nobody likes change. But I'm not going to tell you something different that isn't happening around this world, and most certainly in North America. There is an evolution in food services today. That's what businesses have to do. We have to keep up. I'm not going to blame my brothers and sisters over there why they're busy and I'm not. This is the spirit of competition. What are we doing that's different here? You guys are listening to food trucks, actual stakeholders that matter, and that's not happening everywhere else. We're talking about antiquated legislation that was never built for what the contemporary food truck is all about. That was never meant. You can't operate a food truck under 15-minute intervals. My goodness, it takes us probably 45 minutes just to heat up our oil, just like it does in a brick and mortar restaurant. What makes it different? We have people, part of this industry, who are engaged in the conversation. And it's fantastic that the KDBIA is here representing, that they could say the same things in support of food trucks. What I'm asking you is, now that you've heard from stakeholders, let's move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez?
Thanks, Ruben, for coming in and giving us the kudos, and hopefully the message will get out to other municipalities. With what you heard from the Kitchener BIA, one of the things that was identified, of course, is the concern and the competition between the flexibility of food trucks to be in different locations, and a brick and mortar, of course, is in location where they are located. One of the things I've heard talk about is maybe having 2 food trucks in the Carl Zaire Square. Would it be fair to ask or to consider that if the food trucks that are coming to the square would offer something quite different from food that is sold within a quick, easy walking distance? Would that be a fair request of the food truck industry?
Through the chair, Councillor, that question was posed in the City of London, and food truck discussion essentially stopped. What we're asking is that the city does not engage in programming our food trucks externally. We ask that you don't imply or impose any different type of standard that you wouldn't for our brick and mortar friends. That indeed, rather than refer to food trucks as these pirates coming in to your communities, that we be embraced as part of the community itself, as part of the KDBIA, that food truckers can contribute to community building, that we have indeed raised thousands of dollars for charities, for not-for-profit organizations, that there is a bigger picture here than what is often captured by perhaps the media, disinformation. Ask the questions and we'll certainly answer them.
Okay, thank you for that. And you're correct. We don't legislate who can, rent or purchase a building beside another restaurant. Competition is good for the marketplace and good for the public.
Absolutely.
But you're also representing citizens in this city who pay taxes and send their kids to school and need to make an earning, a living. So thank you for being here again and your response.
Councillor Marsh?
Mr. Salonga, thank you so much for your powerful and eloquent presentation. I just wanted to ask you, so generally are you in support of the staff report as it is?
To be absolutely clear, I am in support of it. I'm also in support in the recommendations that my friends behind me have presented to you. What I'm most in support of is this process that's already occurring now. It's happening. It's not something that has to go on for months. Someone commented on timing, that it's fantastic that we're here in January discussing it rather than trying to do what I couldn't believe we were able to do last year. There are councillors here who did, I don't know how they did their wizardry, but here we are. Here we are.
Thank you.
And lastly, Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, through you, Chair Davey, and thanks, Ruben, for coming in. And I guess one of the question is, if you could take away one takeaway from last year in here, what is your main takeaway of moving forward?
Without taking away any of my statements I made earlier, my statements were all forward-thinking. Last year, I want to make it clear, food trucks struggled in the same way our brick and mortars friends did too. I never used my weather app more than I ever did than last year. It really did rain that often. I'm not going to argue about weather. What I'm asking for, the one thing that I'd love to improve, is to increase the opportunities. And I know that here in these chambers, we can find underserviced areas we can find cooperation with our KDBIA brothers and sisters. We can do it because there is a need. They've said it. That's our mandate.
Okay. So basically, your challenges is finding day-to-day operations within the city.
Absolutely.
Okay. And one other question is, I just wanted to follow up with Center in the Square, and I didn't really hear too much input about that. And I just want to know how that unfolded last summer. Was that a positive experience, or?
It was very unfortunate. The city staff report captures it. There was a loophole created, and it occupies a place in my heart because I was one of those people who really wanted to help contribute to the Center in the Square, and yet the legislation did in fact allow food trucks to operate there independent of that arrangement. I understand the clarification today, or as it was last year. I'm simply disappointed that we couldn't better serve Center in the Square. We participate in so many fundraising efforts. We participate in fundraising efforts every single week, many times a week throughout our season. I really wish that the Center in the Square could have benefited from that.
Okay. Thanks, Ruben.
Thank you.
There are no further questions, Mr. Salonga. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, so we'll move to questions of staff. Councillor Gallery-Seelock.
Yeah, just a couple, and I'm sure others may have some question and some direction. I'm going to try and put it all in one in 5 minutes, hopefully. My question to staff was, one of the questions of the delegation was timelines with regards to the consultations that you have in your recommendation, those 2 bullet points. When do you foresee that happening, and when do you see those coming back?
Mr. Bloom.
Through the chair, I think certainly the conversation with our transportation planning staff can happen within the next week, the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we can provide some. Assuming the food trucks operators are available to meet, I think that can be resolved fairly quickly. The BIA one may be a little more challenging just because they only meet on a monthly basis, and it's just a matter of finding timelines. And so certainly we could come back with some responses on the parking lots well before the winter is over. The BIA one might be a little longer, but still we can try.
So even if we put like a April-May timeline on coming back, understanding that it may impact some of the food truck dedication, but if we continue to move this forward, that may be a timeline that you can reach for those 2 specific ones. And then I'm going to ask you further, if we're looking at an April-May timeline to bring those back, would you also have the ability to bring back at the same time the 5-day-a-week in Carl Zare Square with any potential amendments that staff may come? Because I understand that's a new ask that's being brought forward today, as well as more information with regards to the distance of separation rationale between door-to-door versus property line?
Through the chair, I'll speak to the first one. Yes, I think as part of this discussion with the BIA, we can have those discussions around 5 days a week in Carl Zare Square, as well as and also report back on any operating implications for that kind of an arrangement. But I would defer the second part of your question to Ms. Harris.
Okay.
Ms. Harris.
The distance separation has been determined from property line to property line because it will take a lot of manpower to actually go out and do door-to-door measurements for all these food trucks. It's not real feasible to be able to go out and do door-to-door measurements for every food truck wherever they're located. Traditionally, with refreshment vehicles, we've done property line to property line. With any measurement where we have a distance separation, we've done property line to property line.
Is there the potential to look at that one just further with respect to maybe not specific to the downtown, but to other areas that may be directed specifically by where food trucks, want us to look at?
We can review it.
Okay, I think that that's something that I think we can push a little further on, maybe not the downtown, but other areas. I know Sunrise Center was something that was suggested, so if there's specific locations that we do that. And then one other...
Just sorry, before you continue, Mr. Chapman, to add?
Through the chair, just two comments. One, I would suggest that we disentangle that from the work that will be done in context with the KDBIA. We'll bring that one forward separately. And also on page 5-7, it responds to the question that the mayor had asked and you've alluded to as well. I would suggest that you may want to consider making a change today. The amendment to section 16A references changing the provision to lunch hours at Carl Zare Square as programmed by the City of Kitchener. You may want to strike the word lunch, and I would suggest that that change will provide the flexibility that you're looking for to do much more programming. Essentially what that will allow is any day of the week, any hour of the day, programming to happen, subject to direction by city staff. So we can report back on what that might look like, but it won't need to change to the bylaw to implement it at that point in time.
Okay. And then I just think we need further follow-up and clarification, maybe in a little bit of a shorter term, with respect to the business park question that's been asked. And if we can just get, obviously I don't think we have the staff here to really address that concern adequately today, but if we can get a report back with that as well in the shorter term, that we can look at that one separately as well. Is that something that staff can commit to do in the near future?
Ms. Harris?
Yes, we can look into that.
Okay, so having said all that, I guess I would move the recommendation in all of the adjoining.
Councillor Ioannidis indicated he was no.
He
okay.
can move it. That's
waived?
fine.
Okay.
I can just put all the added.
Sure.
Added pieces.
I appreciate the cooperation here, but so while we're doing that, sir, can you repeat? So you move the recommendation and
just the added work, obviously, that with the reports coming back with regards to the asks that have been made so that we can make those independently. I think we really need to, I know I'm commenting and I won't say anything more, move forward with what we have today, because it sounds like there's consensus to move forward with that, but we can always bring amendments and make those changes when we have those separate reports and that information.
Very good. Mayor Rabinovich.
Thank you very much. Just following up on some of the questions that Councillor Galloway-Seelock had, particularly with respect to the industrial and commercial zones. As I recall right now, we do allow people that have a canteen business to come to those sites from a zoning perspective and operate their canteen business for short periods of time. Is that correct?
Ms. Harris?
Yes, that's correct. They must be on industrial or construction sites.
On industrial or construction sites.
Yeah.
But so under our food truck bylaw, those same provisions wouldn't apply to food trucks because they would need to be on a site zone that permits restaurants?
Currently, the bylaw states that they must be on site zone to permit restaurants because they're more a restaurant type operation than they are a canteen operation. A canteen operation basically has coffee and sandwiches.
Right, but there are similarities between the two.
There are, and I mean, we can go back to zoning and have a discussion about whether food trucks would come under a different type of zone.
Okay, well, that's maybe something. Would it necessarily require a redefinition of where food trucks are allowed in the zoning bylaw, or is it?
Not necessarily. It would probably be an interpretation of the zoning bylaw, and that would be up to zoning to make that interpretation.
Okay, well, that's something that perhaps staff can take a look at as part of all these various additional things that are being looked at. I guess as part of the conversation with respect to the square, a couple of the pieces that I would like staff to look at as part of that is one, would the trucks, one and or two of them, be necessarily in the square, or would they be on the Duke Street side of the building potentially? And there's pros and cons to that, and so I'd like that to be part of the conversation. And the other part that I'd like to be considered, particularly if we're moving towards permanent locations, is the possibility of requiring any trucks that are at those permanent locations to actually have a plug-in as opposed to be running their gas-powered generators. I know that's common in other places where there are permanent locations for food trucks, and something I'd like to see us potentially move towards. And it may require a phasing in because there's an investment required to make that happen.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Actually, most of the questions that I had in mind have been somewhat dealt with, but I would like to just go over them to emphasize. The first one deals with the zoning that we have in a place like Riverbend. I know at the time when the zoning was established that they wouldn't want to include brick and mortar restaurants, but nowadays, thinking of food trucks, it's somewhat different. So how do we, what do we have to do to open up that zoning? That's one of my, I don't know if that can be answered today or if that's going to be answered with what's been put forward already.
I believe that's captured in
okay,
the direction.
That's captured, that's fine. The other point is I would like to see more, see us look into having more availability on our square here, and I gather that's going to be looked into. Incidentally, when are we going to get a response to some of these things? Because they don't seem to be that big an issue. Is it possible that some of these things can be changed for this year?
Mr. Chapman?
Through the chair, I believe the issue of the distance separation and the zoning issue is something that we can look into and report back in short order, maybe in advance of the February bylaw coming forward. We'll have to talk about that. The issue of the square itself and the discussions around the downtown really is dependent on the KBIA's meeting timing. So I don't think it's likely that those will not be concluded before the end of February. But the direction was to see if that can be done by April or May, which would put us partway into the current season.
So on that issue, who trumps who on the issue? Does City Council trump the BIA, or does the BIA trump City Council?
Ultimately, it will be City Council's decision entirely. Okay. We suspect you'll want the input from the BIA board before you make that decision.
Okay, that's fine, good. The other, I don't quite understand, and I know it's been talked about, and staff talked about it in the report, but I don't understand the difficulty in doing door-to-door measurement. If you take a location like Sunrise Center, I would suspect that there would be a specific area that we would allow food trucks in. Would it not be, and I don't know how many food establishments that are there, you know, one couple of hours of measurement should give us that information once and for all. So I don't understand the difficulty in that. Can someone explain it a little more to me?
Ms. Harris.
As indicated, it does take staff time, and at this point I have one staff person for the entire city, so it becomes difficult to go out and make the inspections, but as I said, we will review it. I would comment on like a place like Sunrise Center. That's private property, so it'd be entirely up to the private property owner regardless whether they would allow food trucks on their property.
Yeah, but once, if they did and they indicate a location, that location would probably be fixed, and it should be quite simple for us to do the door-to-door measurement.
As I said, we will review it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, through you, Chair Davey. My question is more lines towards, because I know a lot of the stuff has been answered already, but is through Mr. Bloom, and in particular with Zaire Square. If we do go that way and further enhance the vitality of that and providing food trucks, how much will that affect our budgeting in aspects towards special events and all that?
Mr. Bloom?
Through the chair, assuming we operate the same way we did last year, is that the programming on the lunch hours was not included in the base fee. Essentially, that was that the license, so the food truck operator license did not include provisions to be on Carl Zaire Square. There's an additional special event fee put on top for food trucks operating that economic development helped the food trucks to cover on the basis that it is providing additional vitality. So certainly there would be an additional cost to events and economic development to have more trucks operating at different times.
Okay, don't cut off yet. So you're suggesting that it'd be rather important that we do program along with that, with the food trucks, to make at least more viable for even for the downtown BIE members, because I think that if we're programming it right, that way we can bring that attraction, bring that mass. So I just want to hear your comment on that.
Through the chair, yes, in addition, one of the things we always tried to do when we had a food truck present was to have live music, which there's a cost to that as well. So certainly if you were looking at it from a programming standpoint, then that's one of the things that, we'd have to look into. What are the cost implications to be able to provide, live music 5 days a week to go along with them.
Okay, thanks. Is it all right if I make just a quick comment? Or?
A quick comment. We still have 3 people in the queue here.
Okay. I'm pleased to see that we're moving forward, and I think the key, discussions that we even had last year and even with this year is we're still struggling with how do we have food trucks operate on a day-to-day basis, and that's the key I think we need to solve and move forward with, and so that's where I'm looking at towards.
Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, if staff could provide me a clarification on page 5-4, about the middle of the page, on inviting food trucks on, as I'm trying to understand, operating on some type of events that are out-of-town vendor for special events. I don't quite understand. Is this for out-of-town vendors or out-of-town events, or is it a combination of both, or what is that?
Mr. Bloom?
Sorry, I may need to ask the council to repeat the question. I wasn't entirely clear on what he was asking. My apologies.
Essentially, the question, he's just seeking clarification on page 5-4, the third item down. To be frank, actually, Councillor Yaneski, if you could repeat the question as well. It's basically, it just says that the city can't control special events that aren't city-run. So if it's a city-run event, then they can invite them. If it's not, they can't. If it's a city-run event, if it's a city-run special event, then staff has control over whether the food trucks get invited or not. If it's not a city-run event, then they do not. It would be up to the event organizer.
So if there's an out-of-town event that comes here, or whatever, I don't know which, I can't think of an example, then local food trucks cannot participate. Is that my understanding?
Through the chair, so if it's a city-run event like Cruising on King Street, Discovery Square, that the city actually operates the entirety of the event, we control which food trucks would come, and in that case, typically speaking, our event organizers will go to the licensed local food trucks first. For an event like the Blues Festival, it's entirely up to the discretion of the board and operators of the Blues Festival to choose which food trucks they pick. Whether they decide to go local or not. Hopefully that's what the clarification you're looking for.
Okay, so it's like, that's an example. The Food Blues Festival, then they invite whoever they want. Is there any other examples of out-of-town events that would be affected by this type of scenario? Or is that the Blues one's the only one?
Through the chair, many of the events are now moving towards having food trucks. So I think it's just to be clear that even though there are dozens, if not hundreds of events that happen throughout the downtown throughout the year, only a portion of those are actually operated by the city. Many of them are private operators. Koi Music Festival, for example, had food trucks. Again, it's entirely up to the discretion of that event operator to pick and choose which food trucks they want for the event.
Interesting. Thank you.
Councillor Galway-Seelock?
Yeah, I said I wouldn't comment, but I forgot one piece. I know I threw out a lot of pieces of reports, but I was also looking to give direction to staff to facilitate a meeting over the course of the next number of months between the food truck owners and the BIAs. And I say BIAs plural, so that we can work with all of them for that to inform the 2016 look at the bylaw. So that's not a short term, just a longer term, something to facilitate that meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. I'd like to just echo the notion that we should look sooner than later at looking at the additional opportunities that were mentioned on 5.1, just in particular, because it is in Ward 10, the use of an on-street parking bay on the north side of Bright Up Street. I'd like to see action on that for the 2015 season. That is the location of the Bright Up block, and so I think looking at the current tenants and then the future tenants, there's certainly support for that. I would think, but I'd like to see this go forward. As I said, 2015.
Thank you. And Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I've always been very impressed with the way we've negotiated this issue by involving the brick and mortar restaurants, food truck operators, and the BIA. It's been an absence of brick and mortar operators here today, but while I welcome food trucks in the city, my one priority it continues to be to support our inner city restaurant operators. And I've been very saddened recently to see several of them go out of business. And I believe that unless we do more to protect remaining restaurants, I predict that between now and the completion of our condo buildings and the LRT, we're going to see more closures. And the last thing we need in the downtown core at the moment is more empty stores. So I have no problem supporting all of these recommendations, and certainly further consideration of food trucks operating in industrial areas. But I think we have to remain vigilant in ways that we can protect our existing downtown restaurants. Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
This is for my comment, okay? Right?
Please.
I'm prepared to support what's before us. I'm very pleased to see the progress that's been made in a year, and I'd like to see us move even further ahead. I do not believe, though, that it's our responsibility as a council to control competition. I think competition is good. I think having alternative choices is good. When it comes to brick and mortars, we cannot control who builds or who opens up a restaurant business beside each other. We can have a whole block of different restaurants, and in a lot of places they find that is good because that gives the opportunity of people that come and their particular restaurant they wanted to go is full. They have other places they can go to, the other opportunities right there in the same location. So I really believe that that's an area that we should not be getting our fingers in too deeply. You have to have a level playing field. A lot of these truck owners live in the community, pay property taxes on other things, but they also pay rent and license fees. That's in lieu of taxes. So I see that the playing field is getting more and more level, and it should be that way. So I think we've come a long way. I believe in getting more activity on the square. It's got to be a good thing for everybody. It's again, if somebody wants to have a lunch, a sit-down lunch with a drink, they're going to go to an appropriate place. That's not. I don't think that's anything to do with the competition. And the other issue that yes, there have been a number of restaurants close in our downtown. The restaurant business, I know, is a very competitive, very harsh, a very tough business to get into and make a success of. And I believe that there are other factors other than food trucks that may have caused some of these businesses to not succeed. So I think we're moving ahead, and I think it's doing a good thing for our community, and it should affect the whole community first in the downtown, but it should affect the whole community, and the whole community should have these opportunities, and we need to keep moving ahead with it.
Okay, 3 more people have queued in. Mayor Vrbenovich.
Thanks. Just very quickly, I will be supporting the motion and all of the additional information that's been requested. I think for those returning on council, they know that I've long been a proponent and advocate of growing our food truck scene here in the city. I do recognize that it is a balancing act, and that we need to. We've made a lot of progress, and we've got to continue to move forward in a way that both allows our food truck operators to be successful, but also recognize the somewhat at times challenging environment we have in our core, and we want to make sure that while we're encouraging progress on one end, we're not hurting ourselves and hurting our community on the other end, and it is a bit of a balance on that front. And Councillor Etherington is right. I mean, we have seen some places unfortunately close their doors. On the other hand, we're seeing others such as Social at the Walper and the Boathouse open up this month. So it's a constant evolving set of circumstances. But I think, as we heard from the BIA, there will be some challenges over the next couple of years, particularly during construction, and we want to make sure whatever decisions we make are creating an environment that allows everyone to succeed, not just some people.
Councillor Yaneski?
Yes, I'm prepared to support this recommendation as well. I think it is moving forward on the food trucks issue. I know the concerns have been expressed about the downtown restaurants in terms of maybe having an impact on them. I know Linda Yahtzee spoke on behalf of the BIA and representing them. Although it's interesting to note here in the gallery, there's a number of people from the food truck industry, and yet nobody from the downtown restaurants and having any concerns. So I'm assuming that they are maybe quite acceptable on this and not strongly opposed to it. I'm also glad to see that the Belmont BIA, which is the only other BIA area in the city, would be also interested in having some food trucks come to their businesses and work with them for special events as well. And the BIA, which is in my ward, they would welcome that as well. The only other concern I have is the issue of food trucks participating or maybe not being able to participate in special events that are held by an outsider operation, like the Blues Festival or any other, where they pick and choose as to who they want, and they may even shut out all you people out there as well, and that could become a concern. And yet we have our local businesses that would like to participate in the Blues Festival or whatever it is, and they can't because of whatever regulations and rules they get that are imposed or worked on with the city, and shuts everybody else out, and that is a concern.
I still have 3 people in the queue. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I'm prepared to support what's before us, but I still want to make my comments clear. I think we need to recognize that the method of operation of a brick and mortar and a food trucks are 2 very different things. And we need to be supportive of both of those industries. So we have to be cognizant of the challenges that will come before our brick and mortar operators here in the downtown core, and we need to be sensitive to their requirements, as well as understanding the nimble model of a food truck industry and allowing, and that's why I'm supportive of what's before us, allowing more additional spaces to be available, and as well as more participation in special events and greater presence in parks throughout our city, allowing a greater market share for them as well. So I think it's really a balancing act, and although I'm supportive of this, I think we need to continue to revisit and look to see that model that we're setting forward continues to be fair and equitable to both a brick and mortar operation as well as the food truck industry.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. I should have asked this question earlier, and I don't know if it's in conflict with Wilson Park. I know has a concession there, but it wasn't listed as one of the parks that food trucks can attend to. Is that one been opened up for availability as well or not?
Ms. Harris?
That was not one of the parks that was approved by council last year.
Okay. I'd like to add that one because I know that there's a lot of ball tournaments and soccer tournaments, and it's really pretty devoid of anything. There's a community center there, and there's a pool there, but I'm just not sure about the hours of operation for the concession. I believe it's run by the Kitchener Minor Softball Association, so I don't know if it would be in conflict with that.
Sure,
So
it is just, a lot of it's captured like in the proposed action of 5.3, operate more parks. It does say the proposed action is to consult with manager of parks planning to determine if any other park could accommodate food trucks and make adjustments in future version of the bylaw if warranted.
Perfect.
So,
That's
yeah.
fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
Councillor Marsh.
So I'll try and be very brief, just to mention in relation to Councillor Yanetsky's concern about, having local food truck providers be, whether they're excluded potentially from some of our local events. I think it's important when we as a council provide some support to city events, not city-run but city-supported events. I think that one thing we could look at going forward is being able to ask those festivals, specifically, the Blues Fest as one of them, to prioritize Kitchener vendors over other ones in their point system or however they decide on vendors. I realize that is not, at issue with our bylaw, and so I'll just leave that as a comment for now to be looked at in future when we look at city-supported events. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No further comments except for my own. I just wanted to comment on a couple items as they came up from committee. First, although we only did have a single delegation, it was the executive director of the BIA representing all of the restaurants, so I'm sure they could have trooped out a number of concerned delegates if they thought that we were going to go in a direction more dramatic than the way that we're going. My other comment is I'm very comfortable with the recommendation as it is. I am much more concerned about the numerous things to follow up on with staff, because when I look at it, it really does appear like we're opening the floodgates when it comes to food trucks. And I think that's to echo some of Councillor Etherington's concerns. I think we do have to be careful, because although it's not a perfect overlap, when someone comes out for lunch in the middle of the day and their belly is full from wherever it goes, that there is overlap there from the brick and mortar. And we have to be careful as well to understand that one of the fundamental differences is that the brick and mortar locations do pay property taxes and they operate at the times when it's not peak, and that there are very serious concerns that we have to be sensitive there. The key here is prosperity. We need to ensure that, I'd like to see it scale more as the population of the region grows, that our food, that we increase the size of the pie as has been mentioned, but we have to make sure that we don't jeopardize the prosperity of our brick and mortar facilities. So with that, the motion has been moved. A recorded vote's been asked for. Okay, the voting is open. And that carries unanimously. Okay. Thank you, everyone. That gets carried. Councillor Galloway-Seelock, I'm assuming you had an extra item to bring up. Okay.
Yeah, I asked the chair if I could just bring up a quick item with at Finance and Corporate Services, specific to budget, and I've already asked for the report on the snow dump, but since that meeting, there's Because I was quoted in the paper, I've had a number of people actually connect with me with a few suggestions. So I'm just looking for additional information in that issue paper. So if I can just quickly outline some of those that we can look at for that report coming forward. One would be, what is our current operating dollars that we put towards the not only the lease, but any manpower that goes towards operating or just leasing that snow dump that we currently lease. Also, what options have been looked at to date with regards to locations for the snow dump, as well as what we see the operating costs would be for that snow dump yearly on an annual basis, because we currently, as far as I remember, only have that capital cost that we're talking about. I'd like to see what the city's operating costs would be for that, because we don't currently operate a snow dump. And then also the option of a 1 year, what it would look like to have a 1 year lease, so we can get that full comprehensive report to make a fulsome decision with regards to whether we own, lease, look at other lands. So it sounds like a lot of work, but realistically, I think we need it in order to make that capital decision at budget.
Okay. Any comments from staff on that request? Mr. Tyagi?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I can answer some of the questions now, and we can provide further information at a later date. In terms of the 1 year extension of the lease, we have been working since the last discussion with council with the property owners of the one of the sites, and where we have the site currently. And by all indications to date, it seems like we should be successful in getting a 1 year extension, and that will give us opportunity to provide a comprehensive report to you at a later date with respect to what we need to do, what the capital cost would be in establishing the site, and also what the operating implications are and what the annual operating cost will be. We are also looking at our operations in terms of not only where we store the snow, but also with respect to the melting of the snow. So we'd like to combine in a report in a very comprehensive way as to what are some of the options, what some of the costs will be. And as I said, if we are finally successful in getting that 1 year extension, which as I said, we are quite hopeful for, then we can provide that information. The only other comment I would make would be that having said this, I think even 1 year extension will require a lot of preparation in terms of the new site, and some of the money that we have requested in the capital budget, regardless of what site is finally chosen, we would require that money. So what I'm going to suggest to council would be when the time comes to approve the capital budget, that monies be approved with the assurance from the staff that we will bring back a very comprehensive report, and nothing will be spent from that account until you have seen the details.
That's good to hear all of that. And just one other point that I forgot is that there is an option from a citizen that he brought forward to me. I can pass along his information. He asked me not to give out too many details, but might be one of our alternative options when we come back with that comprehensive report. But it's good, an opportunity for an extra or a separate a dump location. So it's exciting to hear that update already, but I look forward to that report. Thank you.
Okay, very good. This meeting is adjourned. Do we need to switch? 3 minutes and we'll switch over.